shot by Lennox Lewis.
A right hand by Holyfield.
By Buster Douglas, look at this! He's knocked Mike Tyson down for the first time in his career!
But unfortunately, it'll never happen.
Front punches and punches, and it's over!
I think it's going to be over.
Aguero in big trouble against the ropes.
I have to say there seems an element of genuine hate between these two, Ambrose.
For sure. I don't hate the man.
Just imagine if you bought a ticket. Stop it, Frank. You can stop it any time.
Castillo's in trouble! Weak steps in, and the fight is over!
Welcome back to the Legendary Nights podcast. I'm your host, Sean, joined as always by my compatriot, Johnston, for episode number 7 of season 3, The Tale of Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson. A tale of a heavyweight trilogy that's been quite forgotten about by the masses in 2022. So we're really happy to be bringing you this episode on Floyd and Ingemar, about two of the great heavyweights of that particular era, the 1950s and the early 1960s. And it's a tale of fights which have different stories which we've never covered before, and we are really excited to be covering these for this episode. And Johnston, we've never done much on Ingemar Johansson. I don't even think we've even done anything on Ingemar, but we've done a little bit on Floyd. So this is a great introductory episode for people that listen to our network as a whole to actually be able to get introduced to these two fighters.
It is, yeah. And I mean, Floyd Patterson obviously gets mentioned quite a bit because we have done a lot on Sonny Liston. We've done some stuff from Muhammad Ali. So obviously he's fought them. This is before that. We have touched on these fights before in Cus D'Amato's career profile. But this is a terrific heavyweight trilogy. It really is. I mean, you think about the 3 fights, the best 3 fights in heavyweight ever is Ali Frazier. It's almost unarguable. But when you look at epic trilogies, the only other one you can really say is close to Patterson Johansson is Evander Holyfield Riddick Bowe. Honest to God, that, and I actually think after doing this episode, I think Patterson Johansson probably just edges it. But in saying that, I mean Holyfield Bowe's close, so it is any one of them two. And then you got the new one, which is Fury Wilder. So between those, it's in there. It's in the mix amongst all that. But after you've listened to this, guys, let us know. What do you reckon is the best? Obviously, Ali Frazier's always going to be number 1, though.
So we're going to begin this tale in the 1952 Olympic Games in Helsinki, where both Ingemar Johansson and Floyd Patterson both competed. Starting with Patterson, who competed in the middleweight class, Red Smith wrote for the New York Herald Tribune after seeing Patterson in action before the Olympics began, and he described his paws faster than a subway pickpocket. His fast hands proved the difference when he defeated Omar Tibaka from France on points 3-0 in the first round of 16. He then stopped Dutchman Leonardus Janssen in the first round of the quarterfinals. In the semi-final, he beat Stig Sjorn of Sweden, and Stig Sjorn was disqualified in the third round, meaning that Floyd advanced into the final against a Romanian named Vasily Tita. Patterson was determined to knock out Tita, removing any possibility of controversy in the judging, and that's exactly what he did. In just 20 seconds after the opening bell, Floyd landed a crisp right uppercut on Tita's chin, knocking out the Romanian fighter and securing the gold medal for himself. Ingemar Johansson, well, he had a completely different experience, and one that will go down in Olympic boxing history. After a bye in the first round, Johansson outpointed Horomir Natuka of Czechoslovakia and progressed to the quarterfinals, where he took another points decision over the Yugoslavian Tomislav Krizmanic. In the semi-final, the big Swede won a split decision against Ilkka Koski of Finland and was given the opportunity to win a gold medal for his country. For the showpiece Olympic heavyweight final, Ingemar began formulating a plan, and he figured Ed, as in Ed Sanders, the American representative, was a counter-boxer just like me. One of us had to desert his style. I intended not to attack in the first 2 rounds to save myself for the last and snatch a point victory.
Now into that gold medal match, and the first round actually ended without a meaningful blow, which forced the crowd to whistle and hoot their disapproval. Between rounds, the referee, Frenchman Roger Visberg, reprimanded both fighters for inaction, even as Swedish trainer Sven Suvio implored Johansson to keep his distance. The bell sounded for round 2, and Ingemar remembered. Sanders and I stood in front of each other the whole round without moving a glove. Then midway through, Visberg, the referee, he stepped between the two fighters and he issued a warning to the Swede only, Ingemar later complained. Sanders was just as passive and didn't try to attack, but Visberg warned only me. The American expected that I would give him a free chance to counterbox, but I had neither the strength nor training to attack for 3 or even 2 rounds. I intended to take my chance in the third. At the bell, the referee rushed to Johansson and he threw up his right arm in the air, signalling out, declaring an end to the fight, and then giving Ingo a shove towards his corner. The result was recorded as Johansson disqualified for failing to show fight. Ingemar Johansson had to be led from the ring by the police while abuse was being hurled at him. Floyd Patterson, he sat ringside that night to cheer on his American teammate and was actually shocked by the big Swede's performance. He thought the reason for his poor showing was because he feared Sanders. Back in the dressing room, Swedish national team coach Sven Foren banned him, as in Johansson, from attending the closing ceremonies and commanded him to leave the Olympic Village first thing in the morning, telling him, "You'll never box for the Swedish Olympic team again." The next day, a front page headline in Swedish newspaper read, "For shame, Ingo."
In an article headlined, "Shame's Cup Filled to the Top," Johansson was described as a fleeing rat, fleeing in full Negro terror. The reporter added, "I was ashamed to be Swedish." The Stockholm Press wrote, "A professional career is now finished for him. Ingemar is kaput, a chapter completely written off in Swedish boxing. A cowardly boxer should absolutely quit the sport, as cowardice and boxing don't go together. Johansson was a plain coward and should give up boxing." At the medal ceremony, officials declared there would be no silver medal awarded for the heavyweight division. As the Star-Spangled Banner played, there was Big Ed Sanders atop his pedestal. The adjacent pedestal, reserved for the silver medalist, was empty, but next to it stood a Finnish official holding a balled-up Swedish flag, a symbol of Sweden's disgrace. During Floyd Patterson's medal ceremony, he stood on the Olympic platform with a gold medal around his neck and a bouquet of flowers in his arms. After the conclusion of the national anthem, he was overcome with emotion and bowed to the cheering crowd. First time he'd ever bowed to anyone, he would later claim. 5 black Americans entered the ring on the world stage in Helsinki, and all 5 emerged as champions. Patterson and his teammates were congratulated at the airport on their return to America, and he was asked by reporters if he would turn professional. He responded, "Cuss," as in Custy Amato, answers the questions, and he made his way home. Ingemar Johansson refused to buckle under the excruciating pressure of being labelled a coward, and he said, "I didn't take much notice of the public's anger. If I'd have done otherwise, I wouldn't have come through it. I protected myself as I do in the ring, shut out everything except my own conviction that I had done right and that my only chance had lain in exactly the way I planned."
Well, Ingemar Johansson returned to Sweden with no welcome from his country, so he went straight to his family for some much needed support. And Ingemar later recalled that, "Dad took my hand and said, 'You did absolutely right. Don't let them get to you.'" Johansson was determined not to quit boxing, but he did retire from the amateur boxing scene with a record of 60 wins and 11 defeats. Patterson had 45 amateur fights, knocked out 37 across 4 different weight classes, giving him experience against opponents that ranged from lightweights to hard-hitting light heavyweights. We will now move into the intertwining careers of both fighters, starting with Floyd Patterson, who wanted to turn professional as soon as possible so he could bring some much needed cash for the family who were actually struggling to make ends meet. Cus D'Amato, who was the person who actually talked Floyd Patterson into going to the Olympics, had already taken the necessary steps to make the turnover a smooth one. But first, a formal written contract had to be signed if Floyd wanted Cus to continue managing his career. D'Amato said publicly, with character that ran so deep, it was plain that Floyd's word and faith were more important than a contract. Yet, as we mentioned in the Graziano Zhao episode only recently, Cus missed out on Rocky to the mob, and he didn't want the same thing happening again with Floyd. The contract gave D'Amato complete control and excluded the man who actually discovered Floyd Patterson, and that was Frank Lavelle. However, he would continue to participate in training and work his corner during fights. Only now he'd actually get paid for his work. Floyd trusted Cus and signed. Eager to start bringing in the money for his family, Cus took his younger fighter to the Stillman's gym in New York to begin his path in the pro game.
Cus immediately hired Dan Florio, who had worked with the very best alongside his brother Nick and coach Tony Canzoniere, battling Battolino, Pete Scalzo and Freddie Miller to world titles. He had also been responsible for resurrecting the career of Jersey Joe Walcott, working the corner against Joe Louis in 1947. Florio's first impressions of Patterson were, he has to learn everything. His stance, he fights with his legs too far apart, he hops around all the time, he jumps like a kangaroo and throws a right. He don't keep his hands up. Cus allowed Dan Florio to work with Floyd so he could correct his flaws and improve his assets. We have done a career profile on Cus D'Amato, and we have explained how many within the boxing business considered him to be a little strange man, but he had now begun to devise his own cunning plan. He lived in his gym, sleeping in a small room next to the boxing ring, a baseball bat within an easy reach, a gun or two hidden away, with his face dog curled up on the floor next to him. He never rode subways fearing enemies could push him onto the tracks as he waited for a train. The reason for this paranoia was because he had every intention to work against the mob, the IBC, and in turn the International Boxing Guild, which was an organisation of boxing managers that had fallen victim to the IBC. For a manager to get a fighter on TV, he knew he'd pay a tribute to the IBC, which would be collected by the Guild. For a time, D'Amato was the Guild's travelling salesman, picking up those payments, but at some point, for reasons he didn't disclose publicly, Cus washed his hands of the whole matter, retreated, and began to formulate his own plans.
Well, Cus D'Amato's aim was to rise to the top of the boxing power hierarchy on his own terms, but to do this he would need a fighter of such public acclaim that the IBC could not shut him down or shut him out. D'Amato believed that Floyd Patterson could be that fighter. After his first professional fight at St. Nick's, Floyd Patterson collected $300 and felt like a millionaire. He handed most of the money over to his mother for household expenses, keeping only a small portion for himself, and used it to purchase himself some clothes. Within the next 30 days, Floyd Patterson easily won 2 more fights, and with his combined winnings, he took home $1,100 for what he calculated to be 22 minutes of work. It would take an unskilled labourer like his father months to earn that kind of money in the early 1950s. Floyd gave half of his boxing earnings to his parents for the next few years as he rose through the boxing rankings in lightning quick time. And by the end of 1952, he was the main headliner in Brooklyn's Eastern Parkway Arena and developed the core of fans base that would follow him throughout the peak of his professional career. Now, Eastern Parkway had actually become the home base for the legendary matchmaker Teddy Brenner, who had actually walked away at this point from Madison Square Garden and, of course, the IBC. he was able to match Floyd against exciting fighters in action-packed shows in Eastern Parkway, which had a poor capacity. However, that didn't matter because its audience went beyond the arena. The owner, Emil Lentz, had an agreement with a sports broadcasting company, Dumont Television Network, which actually run events all year round on dozens of TV stations. Those fights become popular because of the number of upsets that actually happened in that arena, prompting sports writers to actually name it the House of Upsets.
With the TV revenue making more money than most larger facilities, and the hometown hero Patterson popular for his flashy ring speed and winning streak, money and exposure began to roll in. On the outside, D'Amato's partnership with Brenner and Lentz looked clean, but the owner did have a silent partner in the business who ran mob rackets in the garment district and no doubt paid off certain IBC officials a percentage of their earnings. Kuss was aware, but at least he didn't have to sign up to the International Boxing Guild and so could make an assault on the heavyweight championship. It was a gamble, but Kuss was confident in his young protege's abilities and therefore able to direct his fighter as he pleased without mob affiliation whatsoever. However, it would take time because under the new rules of the most important boxing sanctioning board of the day, the New York State Athletic Commission, Patterson could start fighting 10-round bouts until he turned 20 and 15-round championship bouts a year later. Following Floyd's 9th pro victory stoppage of Dick Wagner, the press discovered that he had lied about his age, saying he was a year older than he was, prompting the NYSAC to suspend him until his age could be proved. Once the issue of his age was resolved, the impatient Patterson accepted the reality that another year would pass before he could become a true contender, and 2 years under the rules before he could challenge for a world title. In January 1954, the New York Boxing Writers Association named Floyd Patterson the Ring Rookie of the Year, which was presented to him by his idol, Joe Louis. Patterson had little time to relish the moment. The 19-year-old began battling some of the best boxers in the world, and within 2 years, he would be fighting for the greatest prize of all, the World Heavyweight title.
Now, while Patterson was beginning his assault on world glory, Ingemar Johansson had made a successful debut on December the 5th, 1952 against Frenchman Robert Mason, who was actually 3-3, alongside his trainer Edwin Alquist. Now, Ingemar admitted he was worried that no one would show up considering his disastrous Olympic final, but come fight night, 5,500 fans filled Göteborg Marschallen Arena. On the way to the ring, Ingemar Johansson recalled what he heard. He heard calls of coward, obviously, from the crowd, but put them out of his mind completely. Mason, France's full-frank boxer, provided little opposition. Ingemar basically knocked the guy out down twice before the fight was actually eventually stopped in the 4th. 7 more victories followed when, on March the 4th, 1955, also at the Marschallen Arena, Johansson was cruising to another comfortable win against a guy called Pellegrini, who actually landed a perfect left hook to the chin. It took several seconds before Johansson realised he was on the mat. In Seconds Leave the Ring, so this must be some sort of magazine, Johansson described what it felt like to be rendered senseless by a blow to the head. In his words, he said, "There is no pain or fear. A swaying feeling comes in waves which become shorter and farther apart the farther away one gets from the blow. At first, one is powerless for 3 or 4 seconds, then comes a clear period of a couple of seconds, then a new wave of a couple of seconds." He was absolutely out on his feet by the sounds of it. Now, Ingemar was in real trouble for the first time in his career. He had been knocked down by a guy called Kuski in 1951, but that was more of a fatigue thing than anything else. Now, against Pellegrini, he actually managed to pull himself up from the count of 8 and survived those extra seconds of the round. 2 rounds later, in the 5th, a frustrated Pellegrini was actually disqualified, not knocking him out, after a 3rd warning for low blows. And Johansson had learned more in this fight than any other. And he said, "I now know I could be calm and deliberate in such situations to bear a blow if it became necessary."
After taking a drab points decision against Uber Basileri, his next real challenger was the former European champion and German giant Hein ten Hoff, who was now 36 and not in his prime, but still capable. His manager joked before the fight, "Tell me which hospital Johansson will be going to so I know where to send the flowers." On August 28, 1955, 17,000 fans jammed in to Göteborg's Ullevi Stadium. At the opening bell, Ten Hoff rushed Ingemar with heavy body shots that drove his opponent to the ropes. Ingemar managed to wrestle into position and pin Ten Hoff against the ropes and landed a left hook to the body and a straight right to the jaw, Ingemar recalled. He sagged slowly, like air going out of a balloon, and he kneeled onto the canvas, ending the fight with a stunning first-round knockout. Johansson was now undefeated in 12 fights and showing so much promise that the American sporting press took notice. Nat Fleischer wrote, "I want to congratulate Sweden. Now you have brought forth a heavyweight for whom I prophesied the great chance of reaching the top of the world. Ingemar Johansson is a positive surprise." To increase his exposure, Ingemar and Edwin went on a 5-week trip to America in early October and checked into a hotel in New York near Central Park. Johansson began his New York mornings with a jog around the Central Park Reservoir and spent afternoons working out at the legendary Stillman's gym. Edwin asked a member of Floyd Patterson's team, Nick Florio, to give Ingemar a look. After watching the big Swede spar, Florio suggested that he ditch his signature left jab, big right hand, and work on throwing more purposeful punches. Thankfully, he ignored that advice, otherwise we would never have seen his signature shot dubbed Ingo's Bingo.
The hammer of 4. Wow, what an idiot if he did. I'm pleased he didn't. We'll go into that one a little bit later if no one was aware of that signature shot. But years later, Nick Florio then told journalist Jimmy Breslin, he was new, so he's talking about Ingemar Johansson, but you could see he was going to be all right. You showed him something, he learned it. He was onto us to let him spar the Hurricane Jackson, who was another contender back then, who was big, but Alquist didn't want to hurt the kid's confidence. But you could see all along, he was a guy who would make good one day. Well, during the evenings, Ingemar Johansson would actually spend much of his time walking around the Manhattan streets, but life in America seemed a bit much for the kid from Göteborg. He wrote in his diary that in Sweden, everyone feels like they mean something, but in America, you felt your lack of importance in a hard, ruthless way. So he was happy to go home sort of a month later. So we're going to jump back to Floyd Patterson, since Ingemar goes back to Sweden. So Patterson from February 15 to May 10, 1954. He won 3 more times to take his career record to 13 wins and no defeats, 8 knockouts, most notably against Yvonne Durrell. In December of 1955, a month before Cus D'Amato announced his intention that Floyd Patterson will contend in the heavyweight or contend for the heavyweight title in the heavyweight division, a black woman named Rosa Parks actually refused to surrender her seat in the white section of Montgomery, Alabama city bus, thus setting off the boycott of the city transportation there in that city. A boycott actually led by a then largely unknown black Baptist preacher named Martin Luther King Jr. Sports and political activism did not mix in the 50s, but black athletes like Floyd were well aware of these developments. Patterson's next opponent was Joey Maxim. He was a completely owned fighter as well by the IBC, by the way, which is something we'll mention, but Cus doesn't like to fight these fighters, but he did fight him. And they had every reason to believe that the fight actually, so this is the IBC, might have the fight staged at the IBC Control Madison Square Garden. However, Cus and Teddy Brenner, who was his sort of co-man at the time, managed to actually negotiate behind the scenes of the IBC and the mob with Maxim to ensure it would occur in Eastern Parkway. It was a small victory for Cus D'Amato, but it was a start of his war against the IBC.
In the contract, Maxime received a $10,000 guarantee from the IBC, plus a kickback of $1,500 for his manager to use as walking around money, as Teddy Brenner put it. Patterson was guaranteed $5,000, easily the most he'd made so far for a fight. Maxime was the former light heavyweight champion of the world that held the title for 3 years. Although he was not the best light heavyweight around, Archie Moore was the best at this time, but he was denied a shot at the title until he eventually was forced to sign with a manager aligned with the IBC. In front of just over 2,000 fans, the 19-year-old Floyd Patterson lost a contentious decision. The Associated Press wrote, "The Olympic graduate Patterson won a newspaper decision over Joey Maxime last night, but the KGX light heavyweight champion grabbed the verdict that counts, a unanimous if unpopular vote by the 3 officials." A poll of 11 boxing writers at the ringside at Brooklyn's Eastern Parkway Arena was unanimous for Patterson over his 32-year-old opponent. Patterson, using a spectacular leaping right-hand lead, battered Maxime in the 6th, staggering him twice. Joey fought back gamely under bursts of fire by Patterson grabbing when in danger. D'Amato quickly announced that he planned to protest the decision with the New York State Athletic Commission. However, his protest fell on deaf ears and they ruled to let the decision stand. This was Patterson's first professional defeat that went into the record books, but he was robbed. Over the next year, Cus D'Amato matched Patterson with average boxers at best, perhaps to build up Floyd's confidence. Mostly, Floyd fought at Eastern Parkway, but sometimes Cus worked out deals with the IBC that allowed Floyd to fight at Madison Square Garden or St. Nick's. Patterson was becoming perfect championship material for this new era.
Well, Floyd is very small for a heavyweight, but he made up for this with his hand speed. Remarkably, as he grew into the heavyweight division, his hands didn't slow down one bit either. 6 of Patterson's next 7 fights took place outside New York in venues separated from the IBC. The one and only fight D'Amato booked for Floyd Patterson at Madison Square Garden was his first heavyweight match in July 1955, and that was a 7th round stoppage against a guy called Archie McBride. Since the loss to Maxim, he had put together a string of 14 straight wins, 12 of them by a knockout. No doubt about it, Floyd Patterson was a star in the making who was actually now rubbing shoulders with the megastars like Billy Eckstein and even Frank Sinatra. They become quite close and went to see the films and movies and stuff apparently. He was always dressed to the nines when in the public eye, and like many of the greatest boxers around in the 1950s and 60s, he drove a Cadillac. Rocky Marciano had won an extraordinary 49 straight fights by early 1956, and only been knocked down twice, the most recent coming in his latest fight. The light heavyweight champion, Archie Moore, moved up in weight to attempt to capture the heavyweight crown, but after putting down the heavyweight champ, he was knocked out in the 9th. Marciano found the fight hard going and said afterward that he was glad it was all over. Then told reporters he was actually contemplating retirement. After a holiday, Marciano decided he had had enough. In April, he announced his retirement, with Jim Norris of the IBC standing right alongside him. Some have actually suggested that this was appropriate because no boxer was more associated with the mobbed up organisation than Rocky Marciano. Some suggest that the real reason that he retired was because he didn't want to face the young and up and coming Floyd Patterson. He and Marciano, as in Floyd Patterson and Marciano, were approximately the same size and both could whack. But the one big difference between them was hand speed.
Patterson was a slender, athletic technician with astoundingly quick hands and fists of dynamite who had dispatched opponent after opponent since the Maxime loss. Dan Florio said a fight between Marciano and Floyd would be no contest. Patterson is just too fast. I've trained a lot of old guys. I trained Joe Walcott. They get tired. And if you get tired in there against Patterson, then God help you, I'd hate to be the guy. In May 1956, the IBC announced its plans to fill the vacant heavyweight throne. They ordered Floyd against the number one heavyweight contender, Tommy Jackson, aka Hurricane Jackson, in June at Madison Square Garden. The winner would be pitted against Archie Moore for the World Heavyweight title. Both Floyd and the Hurricane were guaranteed $40,000, and the Friday night fight would be broadcast nationwide on TV. The United Press wrote this on that fight. 21-year-old Floyd Patterson won decisively at MSG for his 17th straight victory, but his triumph was tarnished slightly by a strange split decision. Surprisingly, referee Harry Kessler favoured Tommy Hurricane Jackson. Patterson staggered Tommy with rapid-fire left hooks and leaping right leads in 8 of the 12 sessions. Tommy almost hit the deck in the 4th and 12th, but he continued to fight back persistently. His best rounds were the 7th and 9th. Floyd was now in line for a world title shot against Archie Moore. However, it was revealed after the fight that Patterson had broken his right hand. Promoter Jim Norris said, "I'll try to match Patterson and Archie Moore for a 15-round fight in September, and I'll try to have it recognised by all boxing organisations as a fight for the title left vacant by Rocky Marciano's retirement." Floyd Patterson credited his former sparring partner by saying, "That Jackson is a tough man. Now I know I can go 15 rounds if I have to, because I wasn't tired after 12, even though I landed more punches than I ever threw in my life."
Well, there you go. Good start from Patterson. He's looking like he's going to get that title shot. Well, he is going to get that world title shot. But for Ingemar Johansson, his first fight of 1956, he outpointed Joe Bygraves at the Mashalan Arena on February the 24th. After a shaky start, Johansson actually adjusted and took a comfortable decision. He remembered that I had to change my style, get closer to my opponent, drive him and tire him physically and psychologically every second. In April of 1956, in his first 10-rounder, the new and improved Johansson met Hans Friedrich, Germany's top-ranked heavyweight, in Stockholm, and he actually knocked him down 3 times in the 9th and once in the 10th to win on points. Afterwards, Hans' manager actually told the press that, "I envy Edwin Alquist. Green and gold forests await him and his boxer." Edwin immediately began campaigning for a shot for that European heavyweight title, who was the champion Franco Cavanici. There were several boxers in line ahead of Johansson at this time, so Edwin was surprised when he got the call from the Italian's promoter offering him a shot at the title in Bologna on September the 30th, 1956. Ingemar's purse was the biggest payday to date. It was a nice $20,000 in a 15-rounder. When Edwin, Ingemar and trainer Nils Blomberg entered the Bologna Stadium to inspect the ring, they actually discovered that it was 14 square feet smaller than the standard, and Ingemar said it was specially designed for Cavinci's wild rushes. However, when Edwin threatened to call the fight off, Cavinci's team, well, they exploded and began chanting, "Ricorda, Leandre Diera," which actually translates into "Remember the Andrea Doria." And that is a reference to the Italian luxury liner infamously rammed 2 months earlier by a Swedish ship, MS Stockholm, a disaster resulting in 46 fatalities. Things were basically getting a bit tense and a little bit weird by the sounds of it, but Edwin stood firm until finally the ring was enlarged. That night, 32,000 fans, insane, watched on as Cavinci took the fight to Ingemar, landing heavy blows and bullying his opponent around the ring. By the 9th, Cavinci was actually ahead on points and Ingemar was cut over his left eye.
Sensing victory, the Italian tried desperately to attack the eye, but Ingemar fought him off. In the 10th, an exhausted Cavici was getting tagged regularly. 2 rounds later, 2 hooks to the body and a right to Cavici's heart took the champion's breath away and he fell, stretched out onto the canvas, conscious but unable to move, while the ref counted to 10. Ingemar Johansson requested Edwin to film the Kavici fight so he could analyse his performance. The film provided a revelation for Ingemar, who had developed a bad habit of throwing a punch and taking an almost immediate half step back, a hesitation that gave opponents time to escape. To resolve this weakness, he worked long hours in the gym to replace the retreat with a half step forward. He explained, the new style meant I figuratively hovered over the opponent the whole time, to hamper his attacks, keep him off balance and punch through his gaps. So now we're going to move back to Floyd, who had set up camp at a Chicago horse racing track called Sportsman's Park. Training was hard going, but Cus D'Amato was acting strange, consumed with fear that one of his enemies would attempt to poison Patterson. So he slept on a cot, positioned so that it barricaded the door to Patterson's room. D'Amato's peculiar behaviour did not go unnoticed by sports writers. Author Gay Talese, who knew both, once said, I got the impression that D'Amato had a sexual thing for Patterson, not that Patterson reciprocated. He then went on to explain the reasons for this theory. He said, Patterson told me he was lying in bed and D'Amato was lying next to him, slipped perhaps into bed. I don't know. It was a training camp. Prize fighters in training camp are intimately open, not sexually, but you are naked, you are free. There is a lot of openness. But this one time in bed, D'Amato had his foot on Patterson's foot, sort of playing with his toes. I've never heard that story before, so taking a break in the story for a moment to discuss that outrageous theory about Cus D'Amato not only being gay, but being some sort of predator. What do you make of that?
I know. I was a bit taken back with it myself. But, you know, this is Gay Talese. The way he says it is he knows both of them, and this is what Floyd told him. So whether you want to believe Floyd or not, it's interesting, isn't it? You know, you've got this, you know, you got to remember that he's young, Floyd Patterson. He's a young boy. I mean, he's a man, but he's a very young man. So, yeah, I was a bit shocked myself, Sean. What do you think, mate? Do you believe it or not? I don't know. I've heard people say certain things about him, but without no evidence until I've sort of seen this.
Exactly. The problem is that there is no evidence, and neither of these men with us anymore to be able to defend themselves. So it is a little bit of an outrageous conspiracy theory from Gay Talese that has apparently been told by Floyd. So if you really want to believe that story, by all means do so. But it was an interesting story taken from one of the sources for the episode, which I found quite a compelling bit of information. So if you want to search more up about that, I am pretty sure you'll find a little bit more information on it. But I felt like it was a pivotal moment that we needed to talk about in this episode, because we don't normally break off the story to do it, but this was something, you know, and up until doing the research for this, we'd never heard before. Never.
I've heard murmurs about things, but he's the first one I've ever seen to actually write anything down like this. But, you know, Talese, he called D'Amato an eccentric, which many people have, probably borderline psychotic or paranoid. Yes, I believe all that. Floyd added to the speculation when he actually answered a question about his relationship with Cus D'Amato, and this is in Floyd Patterson's words. He says, he makes mistakes, but the more they try to turn me against him, the more his quality comes out. Lucky he isn't a woman, I might have married him. It's an interesting statement, because you sort of feel now at this point that maybe he is, maybe not sexually, maybe I don't know, but you do feel like it's an interesting statement, put it that way. Well, going on to the story. So on the afternoon of the fight, so this is the big Archie Moore fight. Floyd's actual wife, Sandra, not his potential wife he would have married. So Floyd's actual wife, Sandra, went into labour and actually gave birth to their little girl, Seneca Patterson. However, handlers in his corner, they did not inform Floyd Patterson, fearing that it might distract him from the business at hand. Moore was an 8-5 favourite. Many preferred Moore based on Patterson's last showing against Hurricane Jackson. On the evening of November 30th, 1956, at the Chicago Stadium, Patterson, now 20, took on the 38-year-old Archie Moore with this incredible record. Listen to this: 160 wins, 20 defeats, and 8 draws. Martin Kane of Sports Illustrated wrote this on the fight. So Patterson's combinations, accurate and fast, penetrated Archie's complicated guard. He manoeuvred his man like a master and scored especially well with his left hook. When he came back to his corner, D'Amato said to him, "If you make no mistakes from now on, you will be the world's champion. Stay low, cover up as you back away from more. Keep your right up when you throw a hook. Don't give him punching room." He made no mistakes. He was hit a couple of times with more hooks, but he was in complete command. Both were actually cut under their eyes, but neither wound was serious. The end came in the fifth. You could see it coming. Patterson coolly measured his man, moved easily into position, caught Moore with a long left hook to the jaw. Moore went down, floored with a single punch. He rose at the count of 9. Patterson was on him again with a left and a right to the head. Moore went down again. There was some dispute as to whether he was up again at the count of 9 or whether he was counted out on the floor. It didn't matter. Floyd Patterson was indisputably the heavyweight champion of the world.
A month after Patterson claimed the heavyweight title, Ingemar Johansson fought Englishman Peter Bates in Gothenburg on December 28th. In 29 pro fights, Bates had never been knocked down and was coming off a 5th round stoppage of Henry Cooper, but he proved to be no match for Ingo. In the second round, 2 lefts and a right put Bates down, out and into hospital with a broken jaw. After several months' rest, during which he was dropped from the rankings for inactivity, Ingemar was pressured by the European Boxing Association to defend his title against Henry Cooper. The fight took place on May the 19th, 1957 at an outdoor arena in Stockholm in front of 10,000 fans. Henry Cooper recalled years later, "The crafty so-and-so saw to it that my corner faced the setting sun, and I was blinded much of the fight. As I went forward in the 5th round hunting him, he drew me towards the setting sun. I could not see a thing, and then, boom." Our Henry had been struck by the first right Ingemar had thrown all fight, and Cooper didn't see it coming, or remember much after that, just hearing the referee count to 10 and wondering why his legs wouldn't listen. Peter Wilson of the London Daily Mirror wrote, "The Englishman's eyes were staring blindly at the blue sky, his limbs twitching helplessly, trying desperately to pull himself upright. But it was like he was a man who had touched the live terminal of a high-voltage wire and had been shocked out of his senses." After the Cooper knockout, Ingemar Johansson moved to number 7 in the world rankings, and he said, "It was time to see how I would shape up against a top American."
When at the age of 21, Floyd Patterson had become the youngest world heavyweight champion of all time, taking over from Joe Louis, who was 23 when he won the title against James Braddock back in 1937. Patterson's reign lasted 30 years until the 20-year-old Mike Tyson defeated Trevor Berbick to win the WBC title. Ironically, both fought under the tutelage of Cus D'Amato. A victory party was actually planned at a Chicago restaurant, but Floyd ditched it, climbed into an automobile and hit the road to New York to be with his wife and his newborn daughter. Arthur Daly of the New York Times wrote, "Patterson appears to have the brightness of fistic futures. Being the youngest man ever to hold the richest prize in sports, he faces the opportunity of becoming the greatest heavyweight champions. In many respects, he's better equipped than Joe Louis was when the Brown Bomber ascended the throne at the age of 23. Patterson was actually voted the unanimous winner of the Edward J. Neal Memorial Plaque, an award given to the Fighter of the Year by the New York Boxing Writers Association. This put him in the company of such stars and superstars as Joe Louis, Henry Armstrong, Rocky Marciano, Sugar Ray Robinson, Benny Leonard, and Jack Dempsey. Impressive. The Chicago boxing writers and broadcasters chimed in as well, giving Floyd their Boxer of the Year award. Even more significantly, the Ring magazine named him its Fighter of the Year. Patterson was back in training by January. By May 1957, Cus D'Amato revealed that he had received 5 offers from promoters not affiliated with the IBC, including one possibility in the United Kingdom. He chose to cut a deal with his old associate from Eastern Parkway Arena, Mill Lentz, to promote Patterson's first defence at the Polo Grounds against the number one contender at the time, Hurricane Jackson. Before the fight, Patterson went on a 5-city American tour, fighting exhibition matches only.
During his tour, Floyd began to use his status as a platform and spoke out about his feelings towards racism. He said segregation and discrimination were not anything new to me. I had lived with them all my life, and like a good many Negroes, I was powerless to do anything about them until I gained a distinctive position. With racial tensions already inflamed, Floyd arrived at the Fort Smith station to find an all-white reception committee waiting for him. They stared as he stepped onto the platform and formed a semicircle to block his path. No one spoke a word, but Patterson understood their message. A short standoff ensued as Patterson glanced around for the exhibition's promoter, who, as it turned out, was nowhere to be found. Thankfully, a priest, Samuel J. Delaney, intervened and he stopped the situation from escalating badly. It was just a sign of the times and how quickly a black man could find himself in the middle of trouble, even if he was the heavyweight champion of the world. After his experiences on the road, Patterson became a lifetime member of the NAACP, the nation's oldest civil rights organisation, which was then battling in the courts to systematically desegregate America. On July 29, 1957, at the Polo Grounds, Floyd Patterson stopped Hurricane Jackson in the 10th after referee Ruby Goldstein weighed the fight off. The crowd booed the decision, but it was the right call. Due to the severe body shots Jackson received, he was actually admitted into Long Island Hospital and was visited by Floyd and Sandra Patterson, along with Custy Amato. Jackson shook hands with the champ and wished him luck in his upcoming fights. Eddie Mason should have been the next fight, but Cuss claimed that his managers were tied to the IBC. The same went for many others down the list until he came to the 1956 Olympic gold medalist Peter Rademacher. In his first professional fight, he actually challenged for the world title.
Absolutely insane, and the guy, I believe, got $250,000 for it as well. I don't know how Cuss managed it, but less than 4 weeks after the Jackson fight, Patterson picked himself off the mat after a shock knockdown and knocked Rademacher down 7 times. The final one coming at 2 minutes and 57 seconds into the 6th round. Referee Tommy Lothram waved his arms to end the fight at the 6th Stadium in Seattle. It would be another year, though, after that fight against the debutant, before Patterson would defend his title again, because Custy Amato, well, he took too long to line up another challenger who met his standards. His philosophy on matchmaking was, in his own words, the art of a promoter, manager, the guy guiding the fighter's career, is to always protect his man. Matchmaking was about making sure your guy won, and that was the mold he had formed for Floyd Patterson. Now he was the champion of the world. Those people who say Cuss protected Floyd when he was champion are right, because that's what he was supposed to do. End of the day, this is a business. It's not just for the entertainment of the people in the crowd. The heavyweight title is and was the way to make money. Nobody knew it better than Cuss. He had worked hard to get into this position, and when other genuine contenders wanted a piece of that cake, he didn't want to give them a slice. Part of it was because he didn't want to do business with the people around them, certain fighters involved with the IBC. Part of the other reason was he didn't want Floyd to lose the title. Custy Amato's view of the world was that the title belonged to boxing and not the mob. However, it didn't belong to him either, and I think that was the biggest problem. In his morally firm way, D'Amato was doing what the mob were doing in theirs. He was hijacking that world heavyweight title for as long as he could get away with it, for as long as he could keep Patterson in place to make more money with that belt. Floyd continued to train away with his family in Rockville Center and away from the press. So it's a whole year out of the ring, and he was so isolated that actually some journalists actually began referring to him as the unknown champion.
While Patterson had his career delayed for 12 months, Johansson remained active He really wanted a top American contender, but he got McBride, who was close enough. Even Nat Fleischer agreed when in the November 1957 issue of the Ring magazine he wrote, "McBride is the best possible opponent for Johansson. The Swede is still an unknown quantity on this side of the Atlantic, but as we know McBride's qualifications well, we will get a clearer appreciation after this fight of what Johansson is really good for." A week before the fight, which was scheduled for December 13th, 1957 at the Marschallen Arena, Ingemar was driving through Gothenburg when he spotted McBride and an older gentleman out for a walk. Ingemar parked his car and approached. He'd never met McBride, but he recognised his companion, a legendary trainer/cutman who partnered up with Ray Arcel, Whitey Bimstein. Ingo called, "Hello, Mr. Bimstein." Whitey stuck out his hand and replied, "I can't remember your name." "The name's Johansson. McBride has come here to meet me." By the time Bimstein left Sweden, Ingemar had left an impression. Whitey told writer Jimmy Breslin in 1959, "All week before the fight, Ingo is around the hotel. You get enough food?" he keeps asking. He wasn't worried about the fight. He was worried about us. Just before the fight, Whitey went to Johansson's dressing room to watch over the wrapping of the opponent's hands and recalled, "The kid was just sitting there, calm as you please. He winds the gauze around, then takes the tape and puts it on. He don't need no second to do it. He holds up his hands. 'Is this all right, Mr. Bimstein?' I said to myself, this kid, he's all right."
Love that. The fight was one-way traffic for 10 rounds. Bimstein told reporter AJ Liebling how the fight went. He said Johansson hit Archie one shot, and if he hit him again, like he'd kill him. When Archie came back to the corner, he said, "Man, that guy's murder. I told McBride to go into his shell and just try and stay away the 10 rounds. He was lucky. At the final bell, he heard the final bell, and the Associated Press reported that McBride had virtually stumbled to his corner. He was in a bad way." Well, Ingemar Johansson was smart with his winnings, always investing it into different things. He invested it into building an excavation business in Gothenburg. Within 5 years, his operation actually grown to over $2 million in earth-moving equipment and a staff of 8. Most of his employees were his longtime friends who were in need of a paycheck, and his brother, Henry, older brother, who actually had learning disabilities. Now, due to his Scandinavian celebrity status, he also invested the money he earned when endorsing clotheslines and sports cars and sporting goods. He was a businessman in the ring, and he was also a proper businessman outside of it, also putting his earnings into his own fishing company, which I believe was run by his uncle, and he also had a restaurant, and he also acquired a pilot's license. This guy done everything. But back to the boxing, and Johansson stopped Joe Erskine in the 13th round in Gothenburg after the Welshman remained on his stool, his face swollen and cut and unable to answer the bell. Johansson recalled, "I hardly needed my right against Erskine. I went into him with my new style, put my left hand in his face and never stopped. From the 4th round, I could do what I liked. The most easy fight I ever had." However, Ingemar was in no rush whatsoever to jump up levels. Telling one reporter, "I have no intention of challenging Patterson until I improve my technique." In the summer of 1958, Johansson stopped the former European heavyweight champion Heinz Neuhaus in the 4th round to the delight of 14,000 in attendance. That was Ingemar's 19th professional victory, 14th knockout, and it earned him $95,000.
While Johansson was busier than Patterson and moving up the rankings ladder, Patterson was trying to get Rocky Marciano out of retirement, but not even the $750,000 offered to him by Frank Sinatra and his partner Irving B. Kahn, the CEO of Teleprompter Corporation, could tempt Marciano out of retirement. In the end, Kahn's associate, Bill Rosensohn, promoted the next Patterson fight, a 15-round title fight against Roy Cut-and-Shoot Harris, who was 22-0 at Wrigley Field in Los Angeles. At the time of the fight, the American Boxing Association had Harris ranked as the number 3 heavyweight contender, trailing only Zora Foley and Eddie Machen, the 2 guys who should have fought Patterson during his year's absence from the ring. And now, as we've said, and has been a consistent theme throughout the episode, there was a lot of racial tension going on, and it was a lot more going into the Patterson-Harris fight. Newspaper accounts said that some Montgomery County people, where Harris was from, viewed the fight as a battle between the North and South. Almost 22,000 people came out to watch the fight, with 151 theatres broadcasting across the country, and they all witnessed an off-balance Patterson fall to the canvas in the second round after Harris landed a combination. Floyd recalled, "I saw punches coming and didn't get out of the way. I thought he sort of pushed me down, but if it will settle matters, let's call it a knockdown." Patterson got back to his feet and took Harris apart, who was exhausted, bleeding and on the deck after 7 rounds. A left hook dropped Harris to the canvas in the 8th, and again just before the bell sounded. By the 12th round, Harris was dropped again and in terrible state, with blood pissing out of his eye. Observers at ringside speculated amongst themselves that if the referee didn't stop the fight soon, one of his eyes might fall from the socket. In the end, Harris's dad threw in the towel and Patterson was declared the winner.
And just like Johansson, Patterson was also clever with his money. His company now was Floyd Patterson Enterprises. He had received $311,000 from ticket sales and closed circuit TV collectively just for that fight alone. He certainly made good money. But the critics were out in force and Patterson was shone in a bad light. He now wanted Matron, Foley or Pastrano, but neither would materialise due to a crazy 6 weeks of upsets. In September 1958, Matron, Foley and Pastrano all had contractual obligations to participate in European fights before they could sign to meet Patterson. Before we come to September 14 in Sweden, just 2 weeks after that fight, Brian London, the British heavyweight champion, knocked out Pastrano. 2 weeks after that fight, Foley lost a 10-round decision to England's Aaron Cooper. Now jumping back to Ingemar, because Ingemar is that date, September 14, Ingemar Johansson sat in Edwin Ahlqvist's office in Stockholm, and they plotted their next move. Willie Pastrano and Zora Foley sat at number 3 and 2 in the world rankings respectively, but after much consideration, they initially chose Foley, but he was obviously already scheduled for a fight against Cooper, which he lost. So Ingemar remembered, we didn't want to go down the list. It had to be someone near the top. That left the number 1 contender, who was Eddie Machen, who was a powerful knockout artist from California. He was like Patterson and Cuss, they were terrified of him. However, Edwin wasn't sure his boy was ready for Eddie. He told a reporter, Harry Grayson, "I wasn't going to let Johansson fall with Machen, not at this stage. I considered Machen to be the hardest hitter of all the heavyweights and I advised him against it." Ingemar himself was uncertain. The two debated into the night until Johansson decided to sleep on it for a couple of days. Ingemar returned and he told his manager, "We'll box Machen." "You'll take the fight?" Edwin asked. "Get him here. If there's a heavyweight who hits quicker and harder than I do, it's time we found out."
Ingemar Johansson later admitted, "Eventually I told myself that I've got nothing to lose. If I lose honourably, it isn't a catastrophe. If I win, I'm on my way to the top." When the fight was agreed and signed to take place at the Ullevi Stadium, 22,000 tickets were sold in a week and would eventually sell out to its 55,000 capacity. Machen's manager, Sid Flaherty, did manage to get the original contract change in the 13th hour and managed to add a rematch clause just in case Johansson won. However, Edwin Ahlqvist had signed the revised contract, but he was Ingemar's advisor, not his manager, and not authorised to approve any contract changes, so it was void. Flaherty and Machen never knew this, so went ahead with the fight after threatening to leave for New York. Johansson was so relaxed moments before the fight that he slept in his dressing room, but there would only be one man sleeping at the bell. 65 seconds into the fight, an Ingo's bingo landed bang on Machen's jaw. He fell onto his back, the first knockdown of his career, but he got up, trying desperately to hold on to Johansson, landed a stunning right uppercut and then a left hook that sent Machen violently to the canvas, his head snapping on the bottom rope on his way down. Now we implore you as listeners to go back and watch this knockout on YouTube and tell us whether the fight should have been stopped, because we do feel it was a moment of bad refereeing here by Andrew Smythe, who should have actually halted the bout. Ingemar then trapped Machen in a neutral corner and unleashed upon him with lefts and rights. Machen's knees buckled, his arms limp, and he was propped up by the ropes. He was literally frozen in a seated position as 17 unanswered blows crashed into his unguarded skull. So this is why we tell you to go back and watch the fight, because it's one of them moments where people complain about fights being stopped too soon. This was a fight that really should have been stopped after that knockdown.
Absolutely. It is horrific to watch when you see from the moment he got up, he's staggering, his arms are low, he ain't even lifting his hands. He should have just been, he didn't need to take that punishment. You don't know straight after. Finally, Eddie Machen, he slid off the ropes to the floor and lay motionless as well, with his head outside the ropes on the ring apron while Smythe counted. Thankfully, Machen did come round while Johansson and his team went wild in celebration. Apparently, Machen wept in his corner after discovering that what had happened to him. After his savage beating, it took Machen 2 years to re-enter the ring, was declared bankrupt, arrested, fell victim to mental health issues, and at the age of 40 died after a mysterious fall from a window. To this day, no one knows for certain what happened to Eddie Machen. Sleepwalking, the authorities speculated. Or was it suicide or an accident? Maybe an episode of Dark Side of Boxing, Sean, I think. After that impressive win, Sweden's undefeated heavyweight Ingemar Johansson had now emerged as the #1 contender. So we're going to move to the build-up for the first Patterson-Johansson fight now. And the negotiations between these two actually began with a phone call from Edwin to Kuss. But nothing was ever agreed because Diamata was paranoid, said that the phones were bugged. He demanded that Edwin and Ingemar fly to New York on separate planes to keep the IBC off their scent. Within days, Edwin and Ingemar arrived. 3 hours later, they checked in to a hotel overlooking Central Park. Gus called, later with instructions. Just Edwin, not Ingo, and I'll send a driver. Edwin was taken to Diamato's secret hideaway in Long Island, a private room in the back of a German-American restaurant, and Kuss spoke of his rivalry with the IBC for about an hour or two, and nothing of substance had been achieved. Before the first fight was signed, Kuss began discussing a rematch clause as well to prevent Ingemar, if he won, to defend his title against an IBC control fighter.
The next day, Kuss called Edwin and Ingemar to his private home on Long Island, where they were greeted by a pair of giant dogs. Kuss told them, "In this town, you have to guard against everyone." Kuss then discussed the possibility of a tune-up fight before they fought against Henry Cooper. Johansson became impatient and stormed out in a huff, with Edwin right behind him. The three met twice more, once at a remote summer cottage along the Hudson River, and again at a private hotel suite in Manhattan, where Kuss obsessively kept checking under the beds. Each time, Kuss dominated conversation with his endless ravings against boxing's evil empire. At one point, Floyd himself was brought in for the first face-to-face meeting between champion and challenger. When the two shook hands, Ingemar recalled, "It was like shaking a lace curtain. He seemed soft." After 5 meetings, the parties were no closer to putting the fight together. Edwin and Ingemar returned to Sweden without a contract, and Edwin concluded, Kuss was a man of many sides, all of them unpleasant. Even so, he was confident that Kuss would come around when he said, "There was a lot of money for Floyd and Diamato in such a match, and Floyd's last championship farces had not been very lucrative." On November the 25th, Kuss said that he was optimistic the fight could be scheduled once he was able to clarify previous misunderstandings, as he said, with Edwin Alquist. 2 important figures enter the conflict, and it was due to them that the fight was finally negotiated. Johansson signed a promotion contract with Bill Rosensohn. In it, Rosensohn agreed that within 40 days he would secure a contract for Johansson to fight Patterson. If he were unable to do so, he would give Johansson $10,000 and the Swedish fighter would be freed of his contractual obligations. If the fight occurred and Johansson won, Rosensohn would have Johansson under contract for a return bout. So it was very difficult to deal with Cus D'Amato. That's the one thing and the trending theme that we've took away from his career profile and this episode so far is that Cus was so difficult to deal with, and even after 5 meetings, it took a separate promoter to come into the picture to be able to get this fight signed, sealed and delivered.
Yeah, it's crazy. And even with that obligation of the $10,000 as well, he's almost going to find himself out of pocket, but we'll go into a bit more of that in a little while. But the turning point, the other person that came into the fold in the negotiations actually occurred in early January 1959 when D'Amato actually dispatched Jack Dempsey. He's newly appointed promotions director. He sent him out to Gothenburg. Cus knew that he, as in Jack Dempsey and Edwin, were actually good friends. And after dinner, Edwin recalled, as they took a walk through the town in the winter gloom, Jack billowing on his thick cigar, the men actually reached an agreement for Edwin and Ingemar to return to New York and sign for a fight in June. It was understood both sides that Patterson would get that tune-up fight prior to his defense against Johansson. Henry Cooper was contracted and offered the already agreed fight with Patterson for a guarantee of $75,000. However, after his upset win against Zora Foley, Cooper's management raised their demands to $150,000. Cus, of course, disagreed with that figure, so instead chose another Brit, Brian London. There were promotional issues and contract problems as well in this. Cus admitted to Floyd that he had failed to read the contracts carefully and had signed away some of Patterson's future earnings. Patterson publicly acknowledged that his manager had made some mistakes that would affect Floyd Patterson Enterprises, but stayed loyal to his manager. One thing Cus failed to mention was that he now actually had a role in Brian London's New York management team. However, the details of those are really sketchy and nothing was ever disclosed. Patterson's performance against London was lackluster, but eventually in the 11th, he went gung-ho and delivered a flurry of hard punches and finished off with a devastating left hook. A beautiful left hook he had at times. Stunning. London went down on his back, rolled over, facing the canvas, and remained motionless for more than 30 seconds after the referee waved the fight off. Ingemar Johansson was there, obviously. He knows he's going to be fighting Patterson next, and he shared his post-fight reflections in Life's May 10 issue, and he said, "I don't know after this how good Patterson really is because he was not pressed. If somebody pushed him harder, we know more. But if Patterson does not fight any better against me than he did against London, I do not worry."
Patterson had less than 2 months to prepare for Johansson, but activity was the key to success, so he wasn't worried about burnout. D'Amato put him through more than 500 grueling sparring rounds to prepare him for the hard-hitting Swede. Floyd stayed in a rough accommodation, he said. The single room in which I slept was only a couple of nails above a squatter's shack. It's a hard business. Johansson, on the other hand, lived the high life at a resort hotel in the Catskills known as Grossinger's and hired Whitey Bimstein to act as his American trainer. He would also get an American manager after Cus managed to convince him that he needed to employ one if he intended to fight for the title in America. There was no such regulation, but Ingemar unknowingly obliged. His European manager on record was his father Jens, but he signed a contract with Cus's close associate, Harry Davidow, which entitled him to 10% of Johansson's purse plus promotional rights to 1 fight a year. It was a terrible mistake from Cus because when the New York State Athletic Commission got wind of his dodgy dealings and called a hearing to investigate the matter, which was held on Friday, May 22nd, Davidow, a Brooklyn restaurant operator, took the stand. One of the first questions asked by the commission attorney, Julius Helfand, was, Aren't you acting only as a stooge for Mr. D'Amato? Davido, who hadn't held a manager's license in over a decade, denied the allegation and said, I asked Johansson if he was satisfied with the contract and he said he was. Next, it was Ingemar's turn and he testified, I was told that I would have to have a manager acceptable to Mr. D'Amato. Helfand asked if D'Amato had provided a list of available promoters, and Ingemar responded, nope, only Davido.
Well, Ingemar actually told Helfand that he originally demanded that Davido receive 33% of Ingo's earnings, but when he and Edwin refused, Cuss settled for 10. It was also revealed that a contract between Davido and D'Amato obligated a 50-50 split. The three commission members announced their decision that the contracts were declared void and Davido would not be acting as Johansson's manager. Helfand said after the hearing, I address myself to you, Mr. D'Amato. The things you've done in this affair are so rotten, they stink to high heaven. The tensions turned back to the job in hand. But 7 weeks before the fight, Johansson still had no official gym to train out of, while Patterson pitched up in a camp in New Jersey, 30 miles out of Manhattan. The New York Police Athletic League then offered Johansson their gym at 10th Avenue in central Manhattan, featuring state-of-the-art facilities and a boxing ring. Ingemar struggled with the stifling heat, and he said it was sultry and difficult to breathe in town with thick petrol fumes in my breath intakes when I ran in the mornings in Central Park. Eventually, they moved to Grosvenor's gym. Again, it's weird how many times I've been to that gym, they eventually moved there. This was after Cuss actually attempted to move him to Hell's Kitchen. This place was in the middle of nowhere. There was like bang in the hood, basically, telling him to train outside. He was just playing some real bad games, and Edwin actually called the place that Cuss had recommended a rat hole. The press were harsh on Johansson during his sparring sessions because he refused to throw Thor's hammer. He complained that I was called a palooka, a sham boxer who had cocked himself up to the world championship fight with a lottery win over Machen. The criticism was really getting to him. He said the period in America became so tough and troublesome that I don't know to this day whether I would have accepted the fight if I could have foreseen the difficulties.
Johansson hadn't helped himself when he waxed lyrical about one of the wonders of the world. And he said, there is something strange about my right hand, something very hard to explain. It is almost as if it was not part of me at all. I never know when it is coming. The arm works by itself, faster than the eye. Without my telling it to, the right hand goes, and when it hits, there is a good feeling all down my arm and down through my body. It is a wonderful feeling. Something just right has been done. It is something almost mystic. During sparring sessions, Whitey pleaded with Ingemar to throw the right, telling reporters afterwards, maybe 100 times I told Ingo, you won't be able to use it in the fight unless you work out with it. He would look at me. Maybe the dame would be there, his bit on the side, called Birgit, who would become his wife later on. And Ingo would then say, no, Whitey, I'm saving the right for Patterson. As the fight approached, Patterson felt himself getting bored and losing enthusiasm for the fight. He just wanted to get past Johansson and move on to bigger and better fights. Floyd gave nothing away, and no one had any idea what was going through his mind. He kept his thoughts buried within himself. To boxing writers, he looked sharp and seemed to have an appropriate mental edge compared to Johansson, who was spotted dancing with his wife and quite simply, too relaxed in and outside the sparring ring. The weigh-in for the fight occurred on June the 25th at the Commodore Hotel, with dozens of sports writers looking on. Patterson tipped the scales at £182, while Johansson at £196.
Certainly not heavyweights today, are they, them two? Cruiserweight all day. But Patterson didn't speak to the press for long after the weigh-in. He was in a hurry to get out because he had another ceremony to attend. He changed into his street clothes and rushed to PS 614 for graduation day at his old school. Patterson arrived just in time to present the Floyd Patterson trophy for sportsmanship, then went through the lunch line with students and drank an extra carton of milk. That was what he was doing after the weigh-in. Floyd hadn't missed the graduation ceremony in years, and he wasn't going to start to miss that day's. Never mind, he actually had a scheduled fight to face the toughest opponent yet in his career to defend his heavyweight crown later on that day. But after the weigh-in, Ingemar actually returned to his suite at the Commodore. He hadn't eaten dinner since the Wednesday, apparently, to appear as light as possible at the weigh-in, and he was starving. And obviously he tucked into some food. Promoter Bill Rosensohn had Yankee Stadium set up to accommodate the 80,000 spectators that he knew were going to arrive. But due to the fight actually being postponed by 24 hours because the stadium's ringside seats were ankle deep in mud, only 21,000 people actually showed up. This was probably because of the price of the tickets as well. Ringside seats went for $100, which was way too much in the 1950s. Teleprompter Corporation, which was handling the closed circuit broadcast, and actually lined up 170 theatres and arenas in 135 cities and was poised to rake in another $1 million. Ingemar Johansson climbed into the ring first and was welcomed with enthusiastic applause, which surprised him given what he'd read about himself in the American papers. When Patterson, the 5-1 betting favourite, entered the ring, the applause was barely greater than his opponents, so it was a pretty even for the crowd. Ruby Goldstein was the man in the middle. Frank Forbes and Bill Reach were the two other judges, and Howard Cosell was making his debut anchoring an ABC radio network broadcast for a heavyweight championship fight to a national audience.
Before we begin, we must give thanks to the author of Ingemar Johansson, Swedish heavyweight boxing champion Ken Brooks, for his breakdown of this fight using commentary from Les Keiter and Howard Cosell.
This is Les Keiter. Tonight in a few minutes it will be my assignment to bring you a blow-by-blow description of the titanic battle for boxing's biggest prize, the heavyweight championship of the world. From our vantage point at ringside, here near second base at this historic stadium, we'll be watching the Panther-like Floyd Patterson, the determined heavyweight king, defend his honors for the 5th time. Razor sharp and ready for what he says will be his finest effort in the ring. Facing the challenge of the menacing mystery man from the land of the midnight sun, Sweden's undefeated European heavyweight champion Ingemar Johansson, the first Scandinavian ever to challenge for the big crown. The handsome, personable contender with the fabled right hand of mystery, the thunderbolt few have seen. And now tonight's hour of destiny for him is at hand. After yesterday's rain forced a 24-hour postponement, an aura of suspense, of spine-tingling anticipation dominates the scene at ringside.
So we're going to go through this commentary. The bell rings for round 1. Les Keiter was calling the action on commentary. Patterson bobs, weaves to the left, to the right in that peekaboo style. Ingemar just pouring away with that left. He couldn't hurt you with it. The way he's pecking away at it at the moment. A left and a right by Johansson to the chin of Patterson. The crowd roars. No damage, however. Ingemar launches 96 jabs, many of them in retreat. Most of them peck and paw, but they keep Patterson at bay and measure him for the right. Floyd, meanwhile, twice attempts to land his proprietary leaping left hook, the kangaroo punch, but fails to connect. During the break, Ingo sits and drinks water to the face from a sponge. Ingemar tells his corner it's all shaping up. In Floyd's corner, Cuss tells Floyd, keep that right up. Howard Cosell takes over between rounds and says, caution, the word to describe the first round. No material damage done to either fighter. Johansson slightly red in the nose and upper right lip.
So into round 2, and Keiter describes the action again. He says Johansson pecks away, backs away. A great retreating style shown to good adventure thus far by Ingemar. Patterson bobbing and weaving, never in the same place for more than a second or two. The champion in a crouch, the challenger in an upright style. Johansson takes a hard left to the head, then bounces him off the ropes. Patterson throws some quick combinations and lands a stiff left. Yet Ingemar continues to move and jab, apparently 107 times in this round, most of them picked off by Floyd's gloves. Halfway through the round, Ingo throws a wild, powerful right that whistles harmlessly past Floyd's head. Floyd lands a stinging left to the ribs, another to the chest. In the closing seconds, the fighters clinch for the first time in the fight. At the bell, Floyd, perhaps out of frustration, does something completely out of character. He gives his opponent the Sonny Liston hate stare, the bad eye, Ingo calls it. Ingemar returns to his stall. How do I look? He asks Edwin. Fantastic. How'd you feel? Beautiful. Cassell between rounds. The first round could have gone either way, but there was no question about the second. It was Floyd Patterson. But tonight, he's facing a strange kind of retreating style. Patterson is calm, detached, almost indifferent as ever. Johansson looking a little more determined now than when he first came into the ring.
Round 3, Keita describes the action. Patterson gave Johansson a long look at the end of the second round. Johansson with a left hook that lands high on the cheek of the champion. Johansson knocks Patterson down flat on his back with his right hand. Patterson's hurt. Ingo later recalled, the blow landed around the bottom of his nose. If it had landed on his jaw, the match would have ended at that moment. We're going back to the commentary and Keita's describing what's happening in the ring. 5, 6, 7, 8. He gets up. His knees are rubbery. Patterson is wobbling like a 3 a.m. drunk. Keita describes more action and he says Johansson goes after him. Patterson's hurt. He turns away. Floyd casually strolls towards a corner, thinking the round is over, but there's still plenty of time left in the third. Floyd turns his back on his opponents and Ingo attacks again. Keita describes the action. Patterson is knocked down. He's flat on his face. The count is 4. He's up on one knee. 5, 6, 7. While this is going on at ringside, Floyd's wife Sandra runs to the ring, screaming at Goldstein, "Stop the fight! Please stop it!" We go back to Keita, who describes the final action there. Patterson gets up. He's locking away from Johansson at the crowd. Johansson gets him in a corner. Patterson takes a right to the chin. Patterson down on hands and knees. The count is 3, 4, 5. Patterson doesn't know where he is. He stands up. His knees are rubbery. Takes a left, right to the chin. Patterson down, right over our microphones. Falling over to his back. The count is 4. Patterson pawing at the ropes. 5, 6, 7.
Incredible. At this point, Floyd remembers thinking, my goodness, that's John Wayne. Why am I looking up at him at this angle? That's when I realised I was on the canvas. Wayne was ringside that night next to Cassell to promote a movie between rounds. Keita continues his commentary. He's up at 7. Johansson on top of him. Shoots a left and a right and a left, and Patterson tries to tie him up. Johansson with a left, a right, a left, a right. Patterson is defenceless. What's holding him up? A right by Johansson knocks him down flat on his back. The champion on one knee. 4, 5. Johansson waiting for him to get up. 6, 7. Johansson waiting. Now Patterson's standing up. He's wobbling. His legs rubbery. Takes a right, a left, and down goes Patterson. He doesn't know where he is. His nose is bleeding. 4, 5. Patterson kneeling, holding on to the middle strand. 7, 8, 9. He barely gets up at 9. Johansson right on top of him. Ducks away from a wild left. Hits Patterson. Knocks him down with a right to the chin. Patterson gets up staggering. Wait a minute. The fight is over. The fight is over.
Patterson looks blurry-eyed. He doesn't know where he is. He stands up 7. His knees are rubbery. Goes after with a left. A right to the chin by Johansson. Patterson sits down right over our microphone. He's falling over to his back. The count is 4. Patterson pawing at the ropes. 5, 6, 7. He's up at 7. Johansson on top of him right above our microphone. Johansson shoots a left, a right, a left. And Patterson tries to tie him up. Johansson with a left. Johansson with a right. Johansson tries to find an opening. Hits him with a left and a right to left. Patterson is defenseless. A left by Johansson. The challenger from Sweden hits him with a right. Right into the ropes above us. What's holding him up? A right by Johansson. Patterson ties him up and then knocks him down. Patterson flat on his back. The champion up on one knee. 4, 5. Johansson waiting for him to get up. 6, 7. Johansson waiting now. Here's Patterson standing up. He's wobbling. His legs are rubber. He takes a right and a left. A right right, and down goes Patterson, touching out of the ring. He doesn't know where he is. His nose is bleeding. 4, 5, Patterson kneeling, holding out of the middle strand. 7, 8, 9. He barely gets up at 9. Johansson right on top of him. Johansson ducks away from a wild left, hits Patterson and knocks him down with a right to the chin. Patterson hits the bell, gets up staggering, and the end. Wait a minute, the fight is over. The fight is over.
Incredibly, Floyd Patterson was knocked down 7 times, hence why the amount of counts 7 times in the 3rd round, and Ingemar Johansson was the new World Heavyweight Champion, the first Scandinavian ever.
Howard Cosell did the interview afterwards, and first up, of course, was Johansson. Ingo, did you think it would be this easy? Well, in the 1st round, I saw my right hand was going in, even my left hook. Were you surprised at how vulnerable he was to the right hand? No, I knew my right hand was coming. Cosell turned to Bimstein and said, "How about you, Whitey? Did you think the boy was going to do this well?" Bimstein replied, "Never for a moment did I doubt it. I always knew he'd knock him out." Howard Cosell managed to get a word with Patterson. A gallant champion, ladies and gentlemen, down 7 times. "Floyd, what happened?" Floyd's response was, "Well, he hit me with a right hand. Didn't you see it coming?" "Yeah, but it was too late." He went down 7 times, probably a heavyweight championship record, certainly exceeding the Firpo Dempsey bout. What kept you getting up? Before Floyd could answer, Custy Amato leaned in to the ABC microphone. "A champion's fighting heart." And he said, "I think that Floyd Patterson will be the first heavyweight champion in history to regain his title." While Patterson was forced to go back and lick his wounds, Johansson told reporters in the dressing room, "I fooled you. You thought my right hand was a fantasy. I show you. And I also show Patterson. We train to make Patterson back off from my left, then catch him with my right as he comes back. When I throw my right hand, it moves so fast, no one can see it. When I hit him that first time in the 3rd round, I knew I had him. I saw the opening and boom, there it was. He kept getting up, but I knew he could never come back."
When Floyd Patterson eventually left his dressing room, he was jumped on by reporters, and he explained, "I was waiting for him to do something with that right hand. I kept thinking, maybe he doesn't have a right hand. Maybe that's why he didn't use it in training. He's a thinking fighter. He outfoxed me." Nat Fleischer was forced to eat humble pie when he wrote, "We all misjudged his true ability. The Swede's victory was as clear-cut as any ever fought for the world's most lucrative crown. There was power in that right. Not even Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey, or Rocky Marciano could have bettered." An estimated 3 million Swedes, nearly half the nation's population, stayed awake all night listening to Radio Luxembourg's live blow-by-blow from the Yankee Stadium. By the time Patterson hit the canvas for the last time, it was nearly 4 a.m. in Sweden. No matter. In cities across the nation, people spilled into the streets. Horns were being hooted as shouts of "Skål, skål, skål" to Ingemar echoed through the city streets. When Ingemar arrived at the local Gothenburg airport, a crowd of 6,000 delirious fans awaited to greet their national hero. The once shamed Ingemar Johansson was even presented with a championship trophy by the president of the Swedish Amateur Boxing Federation. The same guy that said to him, "You might as well quit boxing altogether." It's crazy. At long last, all was forgiven. He began his royal tour not long after greeting his fans and added another 250,000 kroner. It's $50,000 in US, over $500,000 today. Johansson's back-to-back brutal knockout victories against both the number 1 contender, Eddie Machen, and Patterson in less than 4 months is basically, it's so difficult to match. You'll be hard-pressed to find another heavyweight champion with a similar pair of devastating consecutive knockouts against top-ranked opponents. You will have to go as far back as 1933-34, Max Baer knocked out Max Schmeling and Primo Carnera in succession. However, it did take Max Baer 21 rounds, so it's safe to say Ingemar's feat is more dazzling. The other one was George Foreman, but the Foreman when he knocked out Joe Frazier. And if anyone, I'll ask anyone to go and have a look, see if there's anyone that's done a knockout successively like that in championship, heavyweight championship matches. You'll be hard stumped to find one, put it that way.
For the year that Johansson was world heavyweight champion, he appeared on the cover of Life and was named Sports Illustrated Sportsman of the Year, and went to fashionable night spots on 2 continents, while the journalist commended him as the best thing that happened to boxing. He also refused to buckle from the pressure of teaming up with mobbed-up promoters and defied traditional training regimes of reduced sparring and no sex by openly living with his Swedish girlfriend Brigitte, who while still married to his first wife. Johansson was enjoying time in the spotlight, but what he didn't realise was a week before the Patterson fight, a desperate Rosensohn caved in to D'Amato's demands and secretly signed 2 documents. The first relinquished all revenue from television, radio and closed circuit broadcasts from this or any future fights involving Floyd Patterson to teleprompter boss Irving Khan. The second document surrendered 2/3 of his stock in Rosensohn Enterprises to a pair of D'Amato allies, Fat Tony Salerno and Charlie Black. Salerno was a member of the Genovese crime family and a boss of $50 million in a numbers racket. Charlie Black was the alias of connected ex-con and bookie Charles Antonici. According to Peter Heller, author of Bad Intentions, he said Rosensohn had no choice. It was either sign over 2/3 of the promotion or lose the fight completely. Investigators also discovered that D'Amato privately took loans of $15,000 and $5,000 from the IBC's Jim Norris in 1956, the year Patterson won the championship. D'Amato's other business dealings in the mid to late 50s turned out that he knew that Bill Rosensohn had a gambling habit when Cuss brought him in as a promoter. Often in debt, Rosensohn did not have the money needed for the guarantees for the first fight with Johansson. He turned to the Genovese crime family leader, Anthony, as we mentioned, Fat Tony Salerno, and managed to cut a deal for Salerno to provide the upfront money for the Johansson fight in exchange for a share of the profits. And again, we take a break in this conversation to highlight the fact that Cuss D'Amato, while people know him as one of the greatest trainers of all time, and we enjoyed our career profile on him, the stories for this episode certainly bring a completely different side to that man.
They absolutely do, don't they? They really do. And we have mentioned Charlie Black and we have mentioned Salerno, but the thing is it was a completely different way we put it. We sort of held out for this other bits of information here. And so a long-term boyhood friend of D'Amato's was Charlie Black. Already was under contract to receive 50% of the net. Friendship aside, look, Black was vulnerable to because he was a gangster. He was a convicted loan shark with deep underworld connections. Black had secretly been involved in the underside of Cuss's dealings as far back as 1958 with that Roy Harris fight. For reasons never clear, Black received 50% of that profit from that fight. We don't know. A clause in the fight contract required Harris, if he won, to take on Black as his manager, but then Black relinquished his claim to any percentage for the first Johansson fight in exchange for 1/3 ownership of Rosensohn's promotional company. Salerno took another third of that company for the money he gave to Rosensohn. And all this basically, I mean, it's placed Cuss D'Amato in such a bad light, especially when it went public. The man who wanted to clean up boxing was now shown to have dealt with 2 big-time gamblers in Rosensohn and Black, and a shadowy mafia figure in Fat Tony Salerno. It was a scandal for D'Amato's own making that prompted US Senator Estes Kiefer to direct his subcommittee towards prize fighting in September of 1959. You know, if he hadn't have done that, maybe Kiefer hearings wouldn't have happened. In addition, the New York State Athletic Commission reprimanded D'Amato for attempting to seize control of the heavyweight division by acting as both a manager and promoter. The commission also attempted to revoke the manager's license, but Cuss had purposely not renewed his license application. In his career profile, we said it was revoked. He just didn't renew it. Subsequent court decisions decided that a license that had expired could now no longer be revoked. So he ain't going to be managing anyone in New York, biggest commission. 6 weeks after the fight, Rosensohn received a telegram from the Salerno's lawyer, Vincent Bellina, informing him that Black and Salerno had appointed Khan now as the chairman of the board of his own company, and he was squeezed out of his own company. Rosensohn resigned, obviously, sold his remaining share, and Velella told reporters that he was a nice young boy trying to do a man's job, and he could not take orders.
Ingemar was disgusted and explained all to Life magazine. We have heard a lot of very crooked things in American boxing, but we never realised it could be so bad. I'm disgusted and mad at a group of people in American boxing who are making deals behind my back. I feel I am being robbed. I understand why I have not yet received 1 cent for the Patterson fight. The contract calls for delayed payment, but I can't even get an accurate accounting of what I might receive. I have a feeling that if I should lose a second Patterson fight with the same people running it, I would not receive a cent for that fight either. Ingo revealed that he had received lucrative offers to break his return bout clause with Patterson, $1 million to fight Archie Moore, and $500,000 to take on Roy Harris. But Ingemar Johansson was a man of his word, and he said, "The man I am going to fight is Floyd Patterson. I have given my word to fight him, and I keep my word. I must have my money in the bank in my name before I come to America, and a good explanation of who is promoting the next fight. I can't fight Patterson and the mob too." In September 1959, the New York State Athletic Commission launched a month-long investigation into the conspiracies surrounding the fight. Hearings were held, 800 pages of testimony taken, and penalties imposed. In the end, D'Amato's manager's license, as we said, was unable to be renewed, and Charles Antonucci, aka Charlie Black, was barred from promoting or even attending another fight in the state of New York. Cuss told a New York reporter, "I was fighting the mob, and I turned out to be the villain."
He sure did. A Johansson against Rocky Marciano fight was generally considered at this point, when The Rock even began training for a return back to the ring, but ultimately he put the issue to rest when he said, "I don't want to be remembered as a beaten champion." Floyd was diagnosed with a punctured eardrum after the second defeat in his career, and he fell into a depressive state. He remained at home, curtains pulled, lights off in darkness for hours at a time, his children wondering if their daddy was sick. He was depressed and troubled by the memory of the fight and probably looking at John Wayne's eyes on the canvas. Milton Gross from the New York Post spoke with Floyd during this time. There was not a visible sign of the beating he had taken on his face, but there was a subdued sadness in his eyes and in his voice. Patterson told Gross he felt as if he were caught up in some sort of dreadful non-reality. He wondered if he had ever been heavyweight champion at all, or was it just something he had dreamed? He then made a bizarre suggestion. Floyd would talk more if that's what Gross wanted, or if he'd rather they could just sit quietly in the house. Floyd now referred to as a funeral parlor. D'Amato, Dan Florio, Howard Cosell was good friends with him as well, and Jackie Robinson, a really good friend, all visited Floyd in his darkest hour. Even Archie Moore sent him a letter of encouragement, but he was unable to shake off this feeling of shame and dread. The moment came when Floyd was watching television, and he said that the TV was reduced to a slowly fading grey dot and soft hissing from the speaker. He watched that dot and thought about a girl he had once seen who was dying of leukemia. He reflected on how lucky he was in comparison to that stricken girl and her family. With that thought he decided it was time to get on with his life and win his world title back.
Patterson began training for his rematch with Johansson, scheduled for June the 20th, 1960 at the Polo Grounds, while Kuss had disappeared to Puerto Rico. He trained in a secluded, decaying building in Newtown with Dan Florio. When Howard Cosell and his wife came to visit, he told Cosell, "Nothing but rats. I complained to the owner and he said there were no rats in that house. I got a gun, shot 3 rats and hung them up on the line in front of the house where he lives." Floyd then requested the services of Cus D'Amato, who had returned from Puerto Rico and acted as an advisor to arrange a 2-week exhibition tour in Canada. Patterson fought 10 times and he felt ready to return to his decaying camp. While Patterson worked hard in a shithole, the champ juggled lovers during his year at the top and was frequently spotted at a trendy Manhattan night spot with actress and Playboy playmate Stella Stevens on his arm. Then there was Italian supermodel Maria Benna, who loved showing off the dazzling 6-carat friendship ring on her finger, a gift from her heavyweight boyfriend. He lived the high life, but not enough in the gym. He finally arrived on May the 6th, 1960 to begin training in Grossinger's. 6 days later, while sparring, his partner, Cortez Stewart, knocked the champ back on his heels with a jarring right to the jaw. Embarrassed, Ingemar stormed out of the ring and remained in his quarters for the rest of the day. When he emerged on Wednesday, he had harsh words for the newsreel photographers whose bright lights, he claimed, had blinded him to Stewart's punch. As the fight got closer, Patterson was unable to bring in Kuss, so Joe Louis came into camp and he told press Patterson would win by knockout, somewhere between the 7th and 10th rounds. However, he changed his mind after seeing Johansson in training. "I now say it may take Floyd 11 rounds.
Patterson told one reporter that he was his own manager now without Kuss, but confessed he still considered D'Amato as a friend. He revealed that he was now receiving some business advice from a lawyer, Julius November, and 2 lawyers, come promoter, Roy Conn. Floyd and Kuss's relationship was strained, and Patterson made his thoughts even more clear when he actually told a reporter that as much as I dislike thinking it or even discussing it, my manager has been a suspicious man. Undoubtedly he had some reason to be, but over the years, Kuss allowed his suspicion about the IBC and his fight against its president Jim Norris to warp his thinking. Without question, it also warped my career. Patterson was more vocal now, taking charge of his own destiny. He told the New York columnist Jimmy Breslin, "I feel I'm mature now. It's like my weight, it came naturally. I had no special program. I just grew to 190. My neck went to size 16. The same with my attitude. I always used to know what I felt. I knew that all right, but I had trouble expressing myself. Now I can do it. I don't need anybody to do it for me. I'll fight anybody regardless of their name or affiliations. I'm tired of arguments." Floyd Patterson actually did come in 190 pounds, 8 pounds heavier than in the first fight. Johansson was an 8-5 favourite this time, and he weighed in just over 194 pounds, a couple of pounds less than the first fight. For Patterson, Johansson 2, Irving Khan of Teleprompter was actually conducting a test run for his latest invention, a cable TV feed directly into viewers' homes. An estimated 25,000 cable subscribers in 13 cities around the country were asked to pay $2 for the privilege of watching the rematch in the comfort of their own homes.
A lot less than what it is today.
I'd say.
That's for sure. Well, the fight generated over $3 million from radio, closed circuit and movie rights. The largest radio audience ever for a sports or entertainment programme. 51 million listeners tuned in to ABC radio broadcast, a total exceeded by only a handful of Franklin Roosevelt's speeches during World War II. ABC stuck with Les Keita for the blow-by-blow commentary and Howard Cosell for in-between round analysis. Mercante was named the referee and third judge, while the other 2 judges was Archie and Leo Birnbaum. As the fighters came to the centre of the ring, Patterson glanced up at Ingo and saw something that surprised him. Fear, he said. I could see it in his eyes. His eyes told me that he knew I meant business. He knew. He just knew.
Ladies and gentlemen, it'll all happen here in about 8 minutes. The beginning of the 15-round World Heavyweight Championship bout between Ingemar Johansson and Floyd Patterson. I'm Chris Schenkel, welcoming you to the Polo Grounds in New York, which is somewhat a scene of bedlam, as nearly 50,000 fans have come out in surprising fashion to witness this, the return bout between Johansson and Patterson. Johansson, the undefeated champion from Gothenburg, Sweden, weighed in at noon today 194 3/4 pounds, a pound and a quarter less than in his first bout against Floyd Patterson. While the challenger and former champion tonight, Floyd Patterson, weighed in 8 pounds heavier at 190 pounds. It's a warm, breezy, beautiful night here at the Polo Grounds in New York, about 68 degrees. That's the story here at the Polo Grounds in New York as the tension and tenseness begins to move in now, which always goes along with a spectacle, a sports spectacle such as this. People from the world of politics, from the movies, from business leaders are here, and we hope that you enjoy it.
So now we move into the fight, and into round one, and when the bell rang, Floyd came out in a conventional stance instead of the peekaboo style. This was no surprise. His intentions had been reported in the papers weeks before the fight. Yet Johansson was perplexed by the change. Patterson followed Joe Louis's advice and crowded Ingo from the beginning, while Ingo flicked jabs and awkwardly stepped backward to avoid Floyd's inside attack. But Floyd's punches were finding the mark. After just 3 minutes, Johansson's left eye was red and swollen.
Into the second and 45 seconds of the round passed before Ingemar, his face red and his left eye swollen, threw his first combination. Seconds later, Johansson unleashed a heavy right that crashed into Patterson's jaw and forced the dazed challenger into a retreat. Apparently unaware Floyd was hurt, Ingemar failed to follow up. Floyd danced away and the moment passed. Patterson resumed his attacks after the brief setback, and at times Johansson just looked defenceless against Floyd's speed. He was able to slip many of Johansson's responding punches, and Chris Schenkel, providing the commentary for the teleprompters film of the fight, said it's obvious Patterson's chances ride on his left hook. It's not only his best punch, but it is also forcing Johansson to use his best hand, his right, defensively, rather than obviously going on the attack with it. At the end of the round, the two exchanged jabs at long range. Moving into the third, which was a pretty poor round by many, you can see it. Floyd continued his left hook assault while Ingemar fired several rights that failed to connect. Floyd spent the last 30 seconds headhunting and forcing Ingemar to cover up. Not much happened in that round. Into round four. Now, Ingemar's left eye was nearly shut as Floyd continued to score with hooks to the body. Halfway through the round, Ingemar threw his trusty left-right combo. It landed on the side of Floyd's head. The challenger responded, rather than go down this time, with an immediate right of his own. 6 rows back at ringside, almost unnoticed, Customato pulled back his chin to avoid Ingo's jab and jerked his left shoulder to block Ingo's right. He's just replaying the fight in his head while he's watching it. Under his seat, the old man's legs were dancing, apparently. He may not have been in Floyd's corner, may not have been Floyd's manager any longer, but he was still getting a cut of the purse.
Into round 5 and 15 seconds into the round, and Floyd landed a short, crisp inside right to the head and followed up with a leaping left to the body. Then, from a deep crouch, he unleashed a hook aimed at his opponent's chin. Ingemar never saw it coming. His head snapped back upon impact and he went down hard, legs in the sky. Ingemar spilled out of the ring and onto the apron, then scrambled his way back and waited on one knee, eyes fixed on Floyd Patterson. He got up at 9, but was pinned again against the ropes where he suffered a burst of clubbing blows. Dazed and on wobbly legs, he turned away from his opponent, but Floyd spun him around and dug a hard left into his ribs. Floyd Patterson threw a devastating left hook that caused Ingemar's head to whip violently back, and he dropped straight down like a sack of shit. Johansson's arms were stretched out, feet together as he lay motionless, while his foot began shaking. Blood oozed from his mouth and nose, and even from his eyes, where the force of Floyd's punch had actually burst his vessels. Mercante counted to 10, but there was no need. Ingo was totally out for the count. Floyd threw his arms up in the air, and he shouted, "I showed you," to the press, but then immediately rushed to Ingemar's side. He bent down and cradled Ingemar's head as Bloomberg, Bimstein and Carlson scrambled through the ropes. They tried smelling salts and threw water on him, but nothing. Cassell entered the ring and stared down at Johansson's twitching foot and then asked, "For God's sake, Whitey, is he dead?" To which Bimstein answered, "The son of a bitch should be. I told him to watch out for the left."
Whitey, mate, love that response. Twitching, I mean, it's not good, but what a great response. Ingemar was still out as the ring filled with photographers and police, and the ring announcer stepped onto the mic and he said, "The time 1 minute 51 seconds of the 5th round, the winner and the first man ever to regain the heavyweight championship, Floyd Patterson."
I said to myself, I'm going to prove to him. I said, I will probably lose the second fight. I didn't go in overconfident like I'm going to knock this guy out. All I can only guarantee was that when I go into this second fight, after I get knocked out or after I lose or whatever, he's going to have difficulty raising his hand in victory. That was the only thing I can guarantee. And the process of doing so, I knocked him out. You know, in all actuality, boxing is sort of a revenge sport. But revenge right then and there, not tomorrow or the next day, right then and there. You hit me. It may take me around or two, but I'm going to get you back.
Johansson spent 4 minutes stretched out on the canvas before he began to rise. Another 3 minutes followed, with the deposed Swedish champ planted on his stool in his corner of the ring, oblivious to what was going on around him. Finally, he was helped back to his dressing room, where he remained unresponsive, though conscious at this point. Patterson told Author and Sports Illustrated's George Plimpton that he would never again inflict as much damage on another fighter as he had on Johansson at the Polo Grounds. Interesting. Elizabeth Taylor actually sat at ringside cheering on Ingemar Johansson as well. She was a friend of his girlfriend's, and during the round's intervals, an overzealous fan actually yanked the top half of her dress, exposing her breasts, and shouted, "Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you, is this a beautiful sight?" Elizabeth Taylor coolly replaced her bosom and carried on, brushed him aside. Then by the end of the fight, a group of ringside guys sort of messing around began to give Liz and the guy she was with, Eddie Fisher, a bit of a hard time. So in response, she dished out her own bit of banter. She gave them the elegant "up yours." Johansson didn't attend the post-fight press conference until the next day, but he told the press that he couldn't recall anything that happened between the first knockdown and being laid on his back in the dressing room. Even though Patterson won handsomely, he wasn't convinced that he would actually win this rematch. He actually arranged for 2 cars to wait outside the Polo Grounds, one that would allow him to make the very public exit if he won, and another to drive him away unnoticed if he lost. In the weeks leading up to the fight, what he actually prepared to do, or what he was doing, was he had some disguises. He had the fake beards, he had the moustaches, he got all some makeup experts. Floyd had them ready at the Polo Grounds dressing room just in case that he suffered another damaging defeat, and planned to disguise himself so he could flee the stadium unrecognised.
We have covered that before with Sonny Liston's career, and obviously in a previous episode in this season, the tale of Clay versus Liston. You know, when we spoke about Floyd Patterson fighting Sonny Liston later on past this point, it's something Floyd always seemed to do. It was like it's like a confidence thing with him. It's like he didn't have 100% confidence in himself, so he basically planned for each eventuality. Well, Floyd had now created history. He was the first man to ever win the World Heavyweight Championship for a second time. The next morning, the new champ arrived at the post-fight press conference beaming and feeling confident about answering any questions the press had for him. After the press conference, he rode in a parade in Brooklyn that went from the Grand Army Plaza to the Borough Hall, with the borough president, John Cashmore, seated beside him. A few days later, New York City Mayor Robert F. Wagner Jr. declared World Championship Day for the city, and on the steps of City Hall presented Floyd with an award. A 2-hour parade took place in Harlem where Patterson basked in the sort of adulation the African American community had earlier bestowed on Joe Louis and Sugar Ray Robinson. Jackie Robinson and Ed Sullivan co-chaired a testimonial dinner for Patterson at the Commodore Hotel, with the proceeds going to the Wiltwick School for Boys. He told Ebony magazine, "Joe Louis did a lot for Negroes. He did more for our race than almost anybody. Every person, every Negro in boxing is trying to get somewhere near the record set by Louis. It was a victory for us." Floyd's victory inspired a young amateur boxer to write a poem. The poem was delivered while performing sit-ups as the New Yorker's A.J. Liebling scribbled the lines. "You may talk about the Swede, you may talk about Rome, but Rockville Centre is Floyd Patterson's home. A lot of people say Floyd couldn't fight, but you should have seen him on that comeback night. He cut up his eyes, he mushed up his face, and that last left hook knocked his head out of place." A reporter asked, "Ingo, will a rematch be put on?" Johansson said, "Don't know, might be postponed. If he would have stayed in Sweden, he wouldn't have taken that beating. That particular poet was a certain Cassius Marcellus Clay Jr."
Brilliant. And wrote a poem for Patterson, one of his favourite fighters at the time. And I think he disliked him, didn't he, later on in his career? Great poem, love it. Weeks after the fight, Birgit, his sort of girlfriend, stroke becomes his wife. She's another famous Swedish girl. She's absolutely convinced that Ingemar had been poisoned in a New York restaurant. Apparently they ordered steaks, which were brought out under separate silver platters. Ingemar reached for one and the waiter told him, no, not that one. We've made you this one especially for you. And obviously he ate that one. And Birgit even managed to briefly convince Ingemar that something fishy was going on in the hours leading up to the fight. Ingemar claims he actually lost 6 pounds. He did come in underweight under mysterious circumstances the night before. He told reporters in December of 1960, "I was remarkably slow throughout the bout. I was practically standing still." Although sometime after this, Johansson did publicly deny any wrongdoing. However, sources have also suggested that some people close to him, that something definitely went on in this fight. So I think he generally felt something wasn't right. Even Whitey Epstein told the press that he looked goofy that night. Ingemar's brother, Rolf, blamed the painkillers given to him days before due to a back twinge. When a reporter put the conspiracy to Floyd Patterson, he said, "My left hook was the only dope I can think of." The score between Johansson and Patterson was, of course, 1 each, and it was inevitable that a rematch would happen. So Roy Conn and Jack Fugazi were the two who got the fighters together to get the contract signed for this rubber match. The contract for the third instalment was scheduled for Monday night, March 13, 1961, at the Miami Beach Convention Center, with Feature Sports Incorporated promoting the fight. It was a similar contract to the 1960 version, apart from two notable exceptions. For one, there was no return match clause. Patterson told reporters that there were other contenders who have been waiting a long time. "I believe a loser should step aside and give others a chance." Guys like Sonny Liston. Those contenders were, of course, Sonny Liston, Zora Foley, Eddie Machen. The other change was implored by Patterson himself, and he demanded for no segregated seating at the convention center.
Team Johansson settled down to train in Palm Beach, Miami at the 5th Street Gym, which was run by Chris Dundee, brother of Angelo. It is during preparations for the rubber match that Johansson sparred with a young Cassius Clay. Publicist Harold Conrad witnessed the session, and he said Johansson was furious. He was pissed. He started chasing Clay around the ring, throwing right hands and missing by 20 feet, looking ludicrous. Meanwhile, Cuss was now being squeezed out by both Cohen and November. They continued to lick Patterson's ass, but discredit Cuss as mentally unstable. A couple of weeks before the fight, Robert H. Boyle of Sports Illustrated reported on the disharmony inside the Patterson camp. He described Floyd's extended group of associates as being the most bizarre cast of characters to hit the road since Jack Kerouac and buddies cavaliered across the country. The article focused on Julius November, Roy Cohen, Bill Fugazi, Irving Kahn, and especially D'Amato. The sole tragic figure in the lot is Cus D'Amato, entangled in all sorts of legal snares. The press often reveals him as a crook. A crook he is not. A kook he may be. D'Amato arrived in Miami with his position in the Patterson entourage reduced to little more than that of a hanger-on. The appointment of an experienced Billy Regan as referee would play a major role in the night's disputed outcome. Both fighters met at the convention centre for the weigh-in. Patterson scaled at 193, the heaviest of his career, while Ingemar tipped a whopping 206.5, 12 pounds heavier than the year before. Joe Louis took one look and said, "I think Ingemar overdid it at the table." The fighters posed for photographers. Floyd the picture of relaxation, while an unshaven Ingemar looked grim. Trainer Bloomberg, asked to describe his man's demeanour, said, "Edgy and mean, snapping at people."
Well, it was a near sellout with 16,000 fans wanting to watch the final rubber match in one of the best heavyweight rivalries in boxing history. Once again, Howard Cosell and Les Keita manned the mics for the ABC radio. Just before the fighters entered the ring, Keita uttered, "All the ingredients of high drama are here. Electricity in the atmosphere, the big guessing game among the experts. But one belief is omnipresent. It won't go too long. Someone is going to get clobbered."
Third and decisive match in this classic boxing series. The laborer's son from Gothenburg, Sweden, against the truck driver's son from Long Island, New York. Meeting tonight for the most coveted and most cherished of titles in the realm of sport. Who will it be on this night of March 13th at Convention Hall in Miami, Florida, that will leave this ring world heavyweight champion? Here to Convention Hall in Miami, Florida have come 16,000 boxing fans, a capacity crowd to try and find the answer. Now to those of you throughout the country and Canada, warm and hearty welcome, because you are among those that are watching at 207 locations in the United States, the District of Columbia, and throughout Canada. As this drama unfolds tonight, this will be the beginning, a new beginning in the careers of the winner, because there has not been a return bout clause in the contract that Ingemar Johansson and Floyd Patterson signed. The beginning of this night was just 2 hours ago as Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson arrived at their dressing rooms. Their hands have been taped. They are dressed for the fight. Any moment now, they will be leaving their dressing room.
Now into the first round, and from the opening bell, it was apparent that Patterson was facing a better Johansson than the one in a rematch. He was up on his toes, firing his left, hunting for an opening. Halfway through the round, he threw a right hand over a Patterson jab that landed on the temple, and Patterson went down. "The thunder landed," shrieked Les Keita at ringside. Patterson was up at 2, but dazed. But this was Florida, home of the mandatory 8 count. That was the one other thing that was added to this. And Ingemar was forced to wait just outside the ropes. Whitey Bimstein, who hadn't attended the weigh-in and was unaware of the rules, screamed, "No, no, no, this will save Floyd." Moments later, Ingemar landed a left hook to the jaw and Patterson crumbled again. Ingemar sprinted to the corner as Patterson scrambled to his feet for another 8 count. Then Regan waved the two fighters in and Ingemar was looking for that knockout blow. He's forcing Floyd to the ropes. Then all of a sudden the champ caught him with a swift right to the jaw, then catapulted off the ropes with a leaping left hook that put Johansson down. Now it was Ingo who needed the 8-second count, standing count, as Floyd apparently locked eyes with Cus D'Amato and gave the old man a wave and a wink. At the end of the round, Keita was absolutely beside himself. "One of the greatest first rounds of all time," he said.
Into round 2, and both men went headhunting, each seeking to capitalise on the previous round's knockdowns. The men exchanged hard rights. Ingemar kept his left in Floyd's face, but took a shot to the ribs in the closing seconds. It was a decent round for Johansson, but on his stool between rounds, he began breathing heavily. In the third, Ingemar began bleeding from a cut over his right eye, possibly from a clash of heads. Ingemar was throwing his right while Patterson worked on the inside, scoring with a series of rabbit punches. Ingemar's left eye was starting to swell, and in the closing seconds he absorbed a hook that buckled his knees. Between rounds, Bimstein applied ice to the eye, as Keita commentated, "This fight is bound to go down in history." In the fourth, Ingemar landed a right that sent Floyd into retreat. Keita said, "As long as he's throwing that right, look out, something could happen." Floyd was now cut over his left eye and on the bridge of his nose. Keita shouted, "They're throwing punches in barrages now, not combinations." In the closing seconds, Floyd launched a two-fisted attack that had Ingemar in trouble, and Keita on commentary said, "They said they couldn't be better than the first two fights, and they've done it already."
Into the fifth, and the champ opened with a flurry that forced Ingemar, now bleeding from his nose, to cover up. He poured with the left, keeping Floyd at bay, measuring his man for a right without success. Keita on the commentary again, "We're sitting on a honey tonight. Old baby, what a battle." Into the sixth, Johansson looked rejuvenated and landed a series of rights which had Floyd in trouble for the first time since the opening round. Keita again, Ingo with a left to the nose, Patterson backing away, trying to avoid the dynamite. Ingo's eyes look clear as he looks right into our microphone. What happened next would ignite debate in the coming days and weeks. 2.5 minutes into the sixth, and Floyd threw a wicked left that caught Johansson high on the forehead, followed immediately by two clubbing rights, one on the neck and the other behind the left ear. And down went Johansson nose first and onto all fours. Within seconds, he was on one knee and in control of his faculties. But when Regan's count hit 5, Ingemar lost his balance and fell over. At 9, Ingemar's knees were lifting off the canvas. He was clearly up, but barely, as Regan counted to 10. And this is Kate's commentary. He said, "He got up. Wait a minute. According to the referee, he did not get up in time. Ingo is arguing, but Regan is pushing him back into the corner, and that means the fight is over." Just when things look bad for him, Floyd Patterson comes back in one of the most scintillating heavyweight fights of all time.
Champion again. They were talking about the controversial end of the fight. Did you think Ingo was truly down at the count of 10?
Well, Howie, it's not for me to decide. That's for the referee. And I don't know what Ingemar, how he felt about it, but I would rather not give an opinion.
All right, Floyd, what happened in the first round? He caught you with the rights.
Oh, yes. I didn't think that he would use it so early. He'd come right out and throw it, but like I said before, Ingemar is a very, very good fighter. I think the odds of 4-1 were way off because, as you can see, I came very close to losing this fight in the first round and a couple of more times when he caught me with the right.
Was there a time when you actually felt close to the end, or did you keep your strength after the knockdowns?
Well, after the knockdowns, I felt groggy, much more groggy than in the second fight. But like I said before, Ingemar is a very, very good fighter. And I think this fight, he will make the Swedish people proud of him, as well as the Americans, the way he took his stand.
Floyd, the inevitable question, what next? Sonny Liston?
Well, Howie, as of now, Sonny Liston is the #1 contender. And I've always said that if there is another man out there that can really honestly beat me in a fair and square fight, as much as it hurts, I'd rather see him with the title than myself.
The announcement, and still heavyweight champion, was greeted with boos. As the ring filled with police, photographers and reporters, Floyd walked to the opposite corner, wrapped both his arms around Ingemar's neck, kissed him on the cheek after his defeated opponent stood back up. Floyd said later, "I think I called it girlish when they asked me about it, but it was my expression of admiration for a man who had fought me well." The fight's muddled conclusion left spectators at many of the 207 closed circuit locations throughout the US and Canada in total confusion. There didn't appear to be a knockout, so why did the referee stop the fight? It was the same question fans around the world asked when the fight film made its debut in theatres a week later. Go and check it out on YouTube and judge it for yourself on whether you think Johansson's knees and gloves were off the canvas in time and whether he should have been allowed to fight on. The video evidence appears to show knees up at 9, gloves up at 9.5. Interestingly, there was no protests from Ingo's corner. Bloomberg, Bimstein, Ahlquist, none of them. When Regan stopped the fight, only Ingemar protested, throwing his arms up in disbelief. Later, Edwin did object to Patterson's final blow, calling it an illegal rabbit punch. But Ingemar squashed it and he said, "I hit him like that in the first fight, and now he hit me. It's all square." Back in the dressing room, Ingemar smiled and asked Brigitte how she was doing, and she told him, "This will take a long time for me to digest. You've never fought so well and yet you lose. It is incredible bad luck."
When Ingemar stepped out of the shower, still naked, he was actually served papers by a pair of deputy marshals. In their hands, a federal prevention of departure notice issued by the Internal Revenue Service to ensure Johansson didn't escape with the $1 million in taxes they claimed he owed from his last 2 fights. An hour later, Ingemar met the press with his face in a bit of a mess, and he said, "I thought I was up in time. I heard the count all the way. When he says 10, I was up and ready to go again. They did not count correctly, I think. I will not retire. I fought my heart out." He left and hooked up with Frank Sinatra, no less, in what was supposed to be a victory celebration. When Ingo and his fiancée arrived, Frank introduced them to a wild applause, and they partied apparently till 3 a.m. in the morning. However, he, as in Ingo, was being held captive in America, a tax prisoner of the IRS, such a danger to society that government agents actually warned airlines and shipping companies that any attempt by Johansson to leave the United States was to be prevented. Then an immigration official added, "The central office in Washington will notify border patrols to keep on watch for you, Johansson." And then the New York Times actually joked that this would be to prevent Johansson from swimming across the Rio Grande. A week later, Ingemar and his attorneys appeared at the federal building in Miami for sworn testimonies on the matter. The government claimed that Johansson had not paid a cent of tax on his purse for the first Patterson bout. Ingemar argued that this money was not received until April 1960, so his 1959 taxable income was zero. Furthermore, his attorney also claimed a bond between Switzerland and America exempted the fighter from paying any taxes at all, and the deposition dragged out for near on 3 hours.
Well, the following day, Ingemar's attorneys petitioned the court to allow their client to leave the country and travel back to Göteborg, as the health of Ingemar's younger brother Henry had deteriorated following neurosurgery. As a toddler, Henry had suffered brain damage after striking the back of his head on an iron radiator following a grievous fall in the Johansson home. Now, on the eve of surgery, Henry was asking to see his brother. Federal Judge Emmett Chateau came down hard on the prosecutors. He told the lead government attorney, "I'm not going to keep this man in prison because you say he's not paid his taxes. You can't do that under the Constitution." Johansson then expressed his gratitude when he told the judge, "It is a remarkable thing that a judge employed by the government should represent the people." 5 days later, on March the 30th, Ingemar was on his way back to Sweden to be with his brother, who sadly would never recover, and within a year Henry would be dead at the age of 31. In November 1964, the US Federal Court of Appeals rejected Ingemar's claim that his Swiss citizenship exempted him from paying taxes on $1.1 million earned in 1960 to 1961. During the period in question, the court claimed he'd only spent 79 days in Switzerland compared to 120 in Sweden and 218 in America. They said Ingemar had set up a corporation where he was its sole employee, calling it a device used by Johansson to escape taxation. Not long thereafter, a court in Sweden ruled Ingemar had to pay taxes on the same amount there too. Ingemar Johansson finished his boxing career in 1963 after 4 straight victories, and his record stood at 26 with 2 losses and 17 by way of knockout. So that is the tale of Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson. And in a moment, we will go into a little bit of an aftermath for Ingemar Johansson, who we've never covered before, and we'll also just add a little bit of context for what happened for Floyd in the aftermath as well, because both of these fighters deserve a career profile at some point in the future from ourselves. So we don't want to put too much into the aftermath of this particular tale. But before we go through this final bit of information, Johnston, this is such an underrated trilogy of 2 guys which were just 2 different types of characters outside of the ring. You had Johansson, who turned into a bit of a party animal, whereas you had a bit of an underconfident Floyd Patterson, who didn't know whether he was going to be leaving in a celebratory victory or leaving with his fake glasses and beard to hide the fact that he'd been defeated. And it turned out to be three great fights, which turned into an overall, for us, legendary tale, legendary night, because of what the stories surrounded it and what happened in the lead up to these fights. I think one of the biggest takeaways that we've taken away from this whole tale is the information on Cus D'Amato in particular. We've done Cus's career profile, quite a long career profile, and there's certain bits of information that we kept aside for this episode because it does put Cus D'Amato in a little bit more of a negative light because of his affiliations. He was trying to fight the mob, but essentially he was always involved with them.
He was. I mean, that's the one thing I think from the Cus D'Amato profile. What came out of that was the fact that we felt like he was trying so hard to not work with him, and he was getting threats by the IBC. You know, you're dealing with some very unsavory characters. You can understand his paranoia. You know, you're talking about Frankie Carbo, who, you know, he murdered how many people? 8 people, I think. They don't know for certain, but, you know, he's part of Murders Inc. This dude was no one. You don't play with these fellas. And he knew that, and he was a bit scared. He was scared of it, but he still confronted it. But then by doing that, he actually, he had the same blueprint as him, didn't he? I mean, I think that's the one thing we get from this. The blueprint he had that he thought was the mob and why they shouldn't do certain things. He was doing the same thing, but just because it was him, he's one person, what give him the right to believe that he should hold the world title and dictate, you know, what happens? And it did delay Patterson's career for that year. It delayed everyone else's as well. Eddie Machen could have had an opportunity. Eddie should have probably fought Ingo. He probably shouldn't have gone out to Sweden and fought Ingo and ends up getting absolutely rendered when he probably didn't need to. I mean, the one thing is the whole story itself is just the craziness with Ingo as well, having the problems with debts. So he didn't even get paid for that fight for a whole year, and then all of a sudden the IRS come knocking on his door. Clearly, like the women, you know, a lot of things you read about Ingemar, he was a very nice, polite young gentleman, and he loved the ladies, like literally just always around him, and the women he was with, quite happy for him to be that way. But yeah, Floyd, dedicated to his wife, his family, and seeing him, that story of him coming out of depression, I think that was a great story in there, and I loved that from Floyd. But he was better than many people think. I think we've been harsh on him throughout the years because of Cus's, the way he sort of used him. But I think Floyd Patterson was a much better fight. I think the trouble is, and you look at his weight, Sean, when we done off the weigh-ins there, Floyd Patterson's a cruiserweight, mate, wasn't he?
Yeah, that's it. That's the thing you've got to consider. Is in today's world, he would be a cruiserweight. He wouldn't be as big as the heavyweights that are out there, the 6'3s, the 6'4s, the 6'9s of the world. You know, Floyd Patterson doesn't live up to that in terms of physical stature. So yeah, he would probably be a fantastic cruiserweight champion because of the speed and the reflexes that he had. He was fighting literally a weight below and fighting these bigger punches, which is why I think at times in the big fights of his career, he comes up short. But let's talk about the aftermath of this episode. Now, we're going to go back to Johansson and just rounding up him. Now, having suffered from Alzheimer's disease and dementia since the mid-1990s, Johansson went on to live in a nursing home in Kungsbacka while his health deteriorated. In the later stages of his illness, he was actually reunited with his second wife, Birgitte, who we've mentioned many times in this episode, and she was actually at his side when he died on the 30th of January 2009 from complications following pneumonia. He was 76 years of age. A question was presented in 1987 to the late Reg Gutteridge, who'd seen a lifetime of the sport's greatest fighters, about what fighters would make the ultimate boxing champion, and his response was as follows: Larry Holmes' jab, Joe Louis's left hook, George Foreman's uppercut, Sonny Liston's raw power, Rocky Marciano's aggression, Jack Johnson's defence, Ken Norton's physique, Joe Frazier's determination, Jack Dempsey's infighting, Floyd Patterson's hand speed, Muhammad Ali's showmanship, and the final ingredient, Ingemar Johansson's right hand. Ingo's hammer of 4 will forever go down in boxing folklore. But Floyd Patterson, as we know, he fought on. He lost his title to Sonny Liston and lost to him twice in 1962 and 63 respectively, but did get back into contention and fought Muhammad Ali for the world title in 1965, losing by a 12th round stoppage. 3 years later, he lost to the WBA heavyweight champion Jimmy Ellis on points, and he did get one last crack at winning the NABF title, again against Muhammad Ali, on September the 20th, 1972, but he retired in the 7th, and that was his last professional fight, ending his career with a record of 55, 8-1, with 40 by way of knockout. Like Ingemar Johansson, Patterson also suffered from Alzheimer's disease, and was then diagnosed with prostate cancer in his final years. He died at his home in New Paltz on May the 11th, 2006, at the age of 71. And we thought it'd be really fitting to do a final quote from Floyd Patterson, and this is what he had to say about his career. My career has shaped my life, and I have learned much. I have met people from all over the world, the highest to the most humble. The finest of these people accept a man for what he is. And that is the end of the tale of Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson. Again, an underrated trilogy. I say this for the 3rd time because it is. It really is one of the most underrated trilogies in the sport of boxing. And I hope that we've been able to put so much context to these fights with all the accurate descriptions which we've put into here. We've talked about all the lead up to the fights. We've talked about all the issues with Cus D'Amato, Floyd Patterson, and the lack of confidence quite clearly even before the Liston fights. It's all evidenced right here in this tale between these two fighters. It's been brilliant. I've thoroughly enjoyed it, Johnston. A final word from yourself before we call this a legendary night.
I really enjoyed the whole tale in itself, the fact that they met in the Olympics as well, and I was interested in how Ingemar managed to switch his career around from the amateur game and that Olympic final and become the hero of Sweden. And Floyd Patterson, just how much of a humble person he was. There's so many other stories. I mean, Floyd Patterson could be a great career profile to do because there was so many other stories and sides to him. And like one story where we didn't mention, he knocked a guy's gum shield out. When the guy turned around to pick up the gum shield, he didn't just go for the attack. He stopped and helped him pick up the gum shield and then carried on fighting. That is the sort of person Floyd Patterson was. He lacked that killer quality, really. And when he damaged Johansson the way he did, knocked him out, absolutely sparko in that second fight, he even said himself he will never do that to another man again. And I think that he lost something there. I think his best performance was the second Johansson fight and then the Archie Moore fights. For me, they were his best performance in his whole career. If you ever want to see the best Floyd Patterson, I think they're the ones to look at. Look, it's black and white. It's a bit grainy. It's difficult to actually see every single shot. But these fights are out there, guys. Go and have a look. The third fight is very frustrating because the fight should have gone on. And I think that would have gone down as probably the best of the lot of them. But yeah, you'll be hard-pressed to find a better trilogy in the heavyweight division. Ali Frazier, obviously. But you've got the most recent one, Fury Wilder. And you've also got Holyfield Bowe. Barring them ones, you pick everyone out of that, but this is up there. I think this is just behind the Ali Fraser for me.
Absolutely. I think even though it was many, many years ago, many years before we were born, when you go back and you look at the context of the stories and everything that surrounded it, and the footage, which is fortunately available for us to view, you can understand and appreciate how good of a trilogy this really was. And in the modern day era of social media and technology, this would have gone down as big, if not bigger, than the likes of Fury Wilder and the likes of Bo and Holyfield. I'm pretty sure this would have been right up there, if not surpassed it, because of that fact. So it's great that we get to put this into modern day and get people listening and hearing the stories surrounding these tales and these fights. And that's why we love putting these episodes together for everybody. So, as always, if you've enjoyed the episode, please do let us know on social media at Legend Night Pod on Twitter, or you can do it across the BTR Boxing Podcast social media pages, which are on Facebook, Instagram. You can find us on YouTube. If you've listened to this on YouTube, please leave a comment below and make sure you've subscribed to the channel as well. A big shout out goes to the patrons of this podcast. We appreciate your support so much. We hope you've enjoyed early access to this episode and an ad-free version of this episode. If you are not a patron and you are interested in looking at what we do and what we offer separately to the general public, then please do go and check out our Patreon page, patreon.com/BTR Boxing Podcast. You will find all the available membership tiers. You will get additional content which is not released to the general public, along with early access to episodes, ad-free content, video content that we don't post out anywhere else. So please do go and check that out. And this is it for this episode. Thank you so much for listening to the tale of Floyd Patterson and Ingemar Johansson.